Chapter 51. Welcome to the Chanel amusement park. This. The man no longer hesitated but pulled out a card from his bosom and placed it on the table. Here, this is it. Since the biggest secret had already been spoken, there was nothing left to be secretive about. Chen Yi looked at the somewhat familiar card on the table, raised his eyebrows slightly, took the card in his hands, and examined it closely. It was a prop. To be precise, it was a pass. Prop name: Chanel Amusement Park Pass. Prop level: D grade. Prop effect: when the Chanel Amusement Park map is unlocked, players holding this prop can enter Chanel Amusement Park unimpeded. Number of uses. Prop introduction: it is said that in Chanel Amusement Park, every item you see has a hidden price tag. A Chanel Amusement Park Pass. Chen Yi slightly narrowed his eyes and played with the card in his hand without speaking. This item was somewhat familiar to him. He also had a Wasteland Pass, which he had so far been unable to use. To be accurate, he did not know how to use it. Chanel. The Tuberculosis Rabbit curiously leaned over and looked. This is now touching on infringement. What a pity, if only it were Disney Amusement Park. I believe the next day Disney's legal department would bankrupt and reorganize this so-called Snow Sea project team. I do not know why it is named this way either. The man shook his head, equally puzzled, because there is nothing in that amusement park that bears any Chanel logo element. You're saying? Chen Yi paused for a moment, put the card on the table, and looked up at the man, speaking softly. You've already entered this amusement park with the pass. How did you unlock the Chanel amusement park map? Well, it's a long story. The man nodded, telling the whole story. I got this pass from a limited time gift pack at 520, completely unusable at first, not good for anything. But the day before yesterday, suddenly there was a system notice. It notified me that Chanel Amusement Park had been unlocked by a player, saying I could enter with the pass. Then I chose to go in. Next thing, a glowing circle appeared before me, I stepped through it, and there was Chanel Amusement Park. There are a total of 6 amusement attractions. This E-grade have a coffee skill of mine was acquired from one of the attractions, the spinning coffee chairs, which really was just a carousel, but with the horses replaced by round coffee chairs enclosed in a ring. Your next chapter is on Empire. As for the other 5 attractions, I dare not touch them. Chen Yi pondered for a moment, then lifted his head to look at the man before him, and placed the Christmas cane on the table. Take me to see it. This. The man obviously hesitated. I won't use you for nothing, I will pay you in points as compensation. No need for that, no need. The man's head shook like a rattle drum. What I mean is, if you, big brother, can take down the other 5 attractions, could you share a bit of the loot with me? In fact, he had been looking for strong players for the past few days to help him through those 5 amusement attractions. But he had not found any suitable candidates. And he couldn't make too much noise about such a matter. The man before him was definitely the best choice, with the title that had pierced through the cafe ceiling giving off an immense sense of security. Even though the share of the gains would be less, it was still better than just looking and not being able to touch. A bird in the forest is not as good as one in hand, he understood this principle. If he could have 10 birds, that would be even better. Of course. Chen Yi slowly stood up, leaning on the cane with both hands. As he stood, the title above his head jumped up a notch, jabbing into the ceiling, and he looked at the man in front of him, smiling calmly. It seems we've now come to quite a decent cooperative intention. How should I address you? My name is Li Tianzhou, but you can call me Little Zhou. Little Zhou. Tuberculosis Rabbit shrugged its shoulders, casually flicked the spent cigarette butt onto the floor and stepped on it to snuff it out before saying, it's rare to see Zhou in someone's name. It's fine, I guess. Can we go to the amusement park now? Yes. Then let's go in now. All right. A few minutes later, Li Tianzhou, holding a Chanel amusement park pass, activated the prop, and a 3-meter-wide rotating white circle of light slowly appeared in front of him. Guys, do I go in first? Sure. All right. Just as Li Tianzhou was about to step forward, he paused again, turned around, and looked up at the towering title above Chen Yi's head with some hesitation. Big bro, can you get in? It won't get stuck, will it? No, it's non-physical. Then I'm going in first. Li Tianzhou breathed a sigh of relief, didn't say much, and confidently stepped into the white circle. Can't see through it. After the man went in, Chen Yi looked at the white circle in front of him with slight disappointment. His Christmas cane's ability apparently couldn't see through this white light circle. What a pity! He had thought that not being able to see through a treasure chest was bad enough, but he couldn't even see through a white circle. So much for its reputation. Let's go in. Chen Yi reached out to stop Tuberculosis Rabbit from continuing to grab carrots from the feed box, sighing with a touch of helplessness. Eat less, will you? If you eat them all, what will the elk eat? I've prepared fresh carrots for it. They're much cleaner than these technologically augmented carrots from the feed box. What if it only likes carrots with a flavor? Hey, no worries, I'll get some coffee-flavored carrots for it. It has probably never had those before. Just come in with me first. Okay, boss. After stepping through the white circle, Chen Yi first felt a sudden sensation of weightlessness beneath his feet, which disappeared in a flash, and then he found himself standing firmly on the ground. They appeared in front of the gates of an amusement park. The surroundings were a void, empty, like a white black hole, with only an audaciously colored amusement park in front of them. The place was entirely pink. The walls, the gates, the facade of the ticket booth, the protective barriers outside the rides. All were painted in a bright pink. The stone steps on the ground were black. The overhead roller coaster was red and green. Not far away, the spinning coffee chairs were brown. It looked, oddly eye-catching. The whole scene seemed like someone took a picture of an amusement park, cut it out, and placed it on a white canvas, then started to smear it with bold colors. Completely ignoring the client's feedback. It's almost like a masterpiece penned by someone on the brink of a meltdown, about to resign and lash out in fury, as if insisting the first draft would be the final one anyway. And moreover, this amusement park didn't seem to host just the three of them. There were quite a few players, who were already turning their heads to look at them. Chapter 52. It's a bit of a fluke, but so far I haven't gotten one wrong. Inside the amusement park, there were roughly 20 to 30 people standing around. At this moment, these players were all standing in place, looking bewilderedly towards Chen Yi and his two companions who had suddenly appeared. As well as the string of titles above Chen Yi's head. Where did this big shot come from? Chen Yi did not speak, he simply stood there leaning on his cane, quietly observing this amusement park, the scene before him giving him a faintly unreal feeling. Is this still Blue Star? Is this still the Blue Star Federation? This must be a space that's been specially sectioned off. Chen Yi suddenly arched his eyebrows and looked up above the amusement park, where he saw a giant lollipop rotating slowly at the center. On the lollipop was a little sprite flapping its tiny wings, continuously licking the lollipop, which by now was half gone. I saw him as soon as I came in. Li Tianzhou, walking ahead, followed Chen Yi's gaze towards the giant lollipop and explained, but when I first came in, that lollipop was still whole. It's only been 2 days, and he has licked away half of it. As for what will happen after it's completely licked, no one knows, but my plan is to leave this amusement park before the little sprite finishes licking. It's better to be safe. Bro, over here, that's the spinning coffee chairs I told you about. Chen Yi nodded slightly and shifted his gaze away from the little sprite, which had the words little sprite floating above its head. As if it were afraid people wouldn't know its name. Li Tianzhou then strode into the amusement park and headed straight for the spinning coffee chairs, which were currently unoccupied by any players. Seeing Chen Yi approaching, the surrounding players also moved aside with complex expressions, quietly staring at Chen Yi and refraining from any superfluous actions. When entering the amusement park, Chen Yi had specifically taken note of the ticket hall, it was empty. Bro, look, here's the introduction to the attraction. Li Tianzhou stood in front of the spinning coffee chairs, pointing to the screen in the air that was filled with densely packed small words. Attraction name, Spinning Coffee Chairs. Attraction description, once the spinning coffee chairs come to a stop, you can sit on them and proceed gently forward to soft music, enjoying your own afternoon tea break. Game rules. 1. The attraction starts every 30 minutes and lasts for 5 minutes. 2. Within 5 minutes, players must quickly answer 30 math puzzles, answering all correctly will allow them to take away a prize, while each incorrect answer will deduct 1 point of amusement park points. 3. When a player has negative amusement park points, they cannot leave the amusement park. Attraction output, for each ride on the spinning coffee chairs, you will receive 1 specific skill fragment. This is it. This specific skill fragment is the E-level skill A cup of coffee. I rode the spinning coffee chairs many times to farm this many a cup of coffee skills. Farming math puzzles. Tuberculosis Rabbit pulled out a cheese-flavored carrot from his bosom and tossed it into his mouth, chewing vigorously with a slightly unpleasant expression. Isn't this a bit too targeted at me? You get all 30 math puzzles right every time. Cough. Li Tianzhou placed a fist against his mouth to cough lightly, his voice betraying a hint of pride. To be honest, it's a bit of luck, as I haven't gotten a single one wrong so far. Actually, the math puzzles here are relatively simple. It's just a combination of 4-digit or less addition and subtraction, without even involving multiplication or division. Generally speaking, it's quite hard to make a mistake. Oh. The Tuberculosis Rabbit nodded, then turned to the other players who were watching the excitement. What about you guys? The spinning coffee chairs are currently at a standstill, about to start up. Don't you want to give it a try? As the words fell, the dozens of players standing by watching the spectacle exchanged glances and simultaneously took a step back. Clearly not many were willing to get on. Only a tall man who didn't step back in time was left standing there. He glanced at his sides and was forced to meet the Tuberculosis Rabbit's gaze. Somewhat embarrassed, he stiffly began to speak. Well, big brother, my math has been bad since I was a kid. This kind of thing is no different from a decisive battle to me. Besides, if you win the reward is average, but if you lose you have to deduct amusement park points. It really seems like a losing proposition. Let this brother have a go. I heard he runs a coffee shop, he needs this gadget. Just then. Beep beep beep, the alarm signaling the imminent start of the spinning coffee chairs sounded, and Li Tianzhou, who had become interested, rolled up his sleeves and found a chair to sit on. After taking a deep breath, he turned to Chen Yi and company. I'll demonstrate for you. The next second, the spinning coffee chairs began to move slowly. And that holographic screen that originally displayed the game's introduction went dark, then when it lit up again there was a math problem on it. 129 plus 239 equals 10,9,8. A familiar problem that wasn't very difficult. It was just an addition and subtraction within 3 digits, equivalent to a primary school level question. You needed to provide a precise answer within 10 seconds, or 1 amusement park point would be deducted. All players start with 0 amusement park points. 368. Li Tianzhou's confident voice came from the chair. And at that moment, there were still 4 seconds left in the 10-second countdown. 328 123 equals 10,9,8. 205. Perhaps due to the many eyes on him, Li Tianzhou's voice on the rotating chair grew louder, faintly filled with unmistakable pride. This problem doesn't seem that hard either, it's just a primary school question, right? Well. The tall man standing not too far away touched his nose with some embarrassment. This question might be just right for primary school students, but for people like us, it's seriously out of our league. Continue reading at Empire. Usually, I'm one of those people who need to use a calculator on my phone for any math over 10, whether it's addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. What if you tried answering with AI, or use a calculator? Would that be considered cheating? That wouldn't count as cheating. The man shook his head, but there's a chance of error whether you use AI or a calculator. Once you make one mistake, it means deducting 1 amusement park point. Although 10 seconds is more than enough time to solve the problem with a calculator, and you'd still have time to spare, it's impossible for anyone to maintain such a high level of concentration for a long period without making mistakes. The risks outweigh the benefits, primarily because the reward just isn't worth much. Just then, an ear-piercing voice suddenly rang in their ears. Incorrect answer. Chapter 53. Sweet Talker. This voice attracted everyone's attention. It's over now. The tall man who had just spoken looked at Li Tianzhou, still seated in his coffee chair, with eyes full of pity. Li Tianzhou, sitting in the coffee chair, turned visibly pale, but he quickly adjusted his mentality. He didn't make any more mistakes, although his complexion remained ghastly and his voice lacked the pride it had before. Soon, 5 minutes passed. 1 error. No rewards, 1 amusement park point deducted. When a player's amusement park points fall below 0, they cannot leave the amusement park. And judging by Li Tianzhou's expression, if things were as expected, his amusement park points had always been the initial 0 points, and now, with 1 point deducted, they had become 1. Is it difficult to obtain amusement park points? When Tuberculosis Rabbit finished speaking, Everyone's gaze simultaneously turned towards a black house not far away, their eyes revealing a hint of fear and dread. Chen Yi raised an eyebrow, leaning on his Christmas cane, and walked straight towards the black house. The light screen in front of the black house clearly stated the gameplay. Game name, Haunted House. Game description, seeking thrills in the haunted house is as exhilarating as searching for a plank in the waves. Game rules, all entities within the haunted house cannot harm players. It's a 1-minute journey. Players who walk from start to finish will successfully clear the game. Game rewards, after clearing, players will be awarded 3 points. Quite simple. But Chen Yi knew why these players were somewhat fearful of this haunted game. If it were any other time, the worst that could happen would be a scare, but now was different. Under the high-pressure rules of May, entering the haunted house and getting scared a few times would most likely mean you never make it out. You would just lie there inside. At this moment, Li Tianzhou also approached with a slightly pale face and an air of tragic resolution, clearly ready to enter the haunted house, and the surrounding players tactfully cleared the way for him. Preparing to send off this brave soul on his final journey. To earn points in this amusement park, there was only one option. Enter the haunted house. If you succeed, you get 3 points. As for whether you can come out alive, no one knows. Brother. Li Tianku's voice trembled slightly with a hint of a cry, I'll go in first, let's meet again if fate allows it. At that moment, his heart was full of regret. Earlier, he was just showing off unnecessarily. He became distracted for a moment and made an error in his calculation, leading to his current predicament of having to enter the haunted house. He had never made a mistake in so many attempts, who would have thought he would slip up this time? Don't rush. Tuberculosis Rabbit frowned and shook his head, what if you just closed your eyes and covered your ears? If you can't see or hear, there wouldn't be any impact, right? Actually, it's not very useful. Li Tianzhou took out a pair of noise-cancelling headphones from his pocket, put them on, his complexion becoming less flushed, and his voice began to tremble uncontrollably, but you could say it has a minimal effect. It's mainly a psychological suggestion. Once your mind is anchored with fear, even if nothing is there, just a tap on the back can send a shiver down your spine. I'll try my best. I've never been in before. These past few days, I've seen quite a few players go in, but only about 3 or 4 out of 10 make it out alive. No need for that trouble. Chen Yi glanced around, took out his mechanical moose Christmas sleigh from his bag, and placed it on the ground. The elk was stuffed into the backpack with him. Logically, a living thing like an elk shouldn't be able to fit into a backpack, but for some reason, the backpack seemed to have judged it as part of the vehicle. It usually sleeps in the backpack when there is nothing else to do. And it seemed to be sleeping rather soundly. Now called out, drool was still hanging from the corner of its mouth, and it stood there with a lost look in its eyes, scanning the surroundings, clearly not yet aware of what was going on. Get in. Chen Yi tilted his head and sneered toward Li Tianzhou, it's not like they said we can't drive. Just drive straight through it. After all, you are the one who brought us here. It would be difficult for us if you were to die here because of these matters. I'll give you a ride. Close your eyes, don't worry about anything else. Isn't this haunted house straight? It's just a few hundred meters, we'll get through it in a few seconds. This. Li Tianzhou was stunned for a moment, then a glimmer of hope flashed in his eyes, and with an excited and trembling tone, he hastened, then I'll trouble you, brother. Whether it works out or not, I'll owe you one for this favor. As his words fell, Li Tianzhou quickly put noise-cancelling headphones on himself, then took a sleeping bag out of his backpack and got inside of it. Hopping and bouncing, he hopped into Chen Yi's sleigh. Then he pulled out an incense stick from his chest, threw it deep into the sleeping bag, and sealed the opening. Soon after, deafening snoring sounds came from within the sleeping bag. Hey! Tuberculosis Rabbit looked toward Li Tianku's smooth actions with some surprise. Ordinary items usually couldn't be placed into a game backpack. This meant the sleeping bag, the noise-cancelling headphones, and even that incense stick must all be game props. And they seemed to come with not so small effects. He always loved collecting these small miscellaneous props. Never did he expect to meet a kindred spirit today. That was pretty smooth. Chen Yi nodded appreciatively, then sat in the sleigh, turned the vehicle around, aimed it at the nearby haunted house, took a deep breath, and pressed the accelerator to the floor, charging straight towards it. Boom! No fewer than 15 red tail flames exploded from the back of the sleigh. The next second, The somewhat odd-looking sleigh burst forth with a speed invisible to the naked eye, charging directly toward the gates of the haunted house. It was almost the blink of an eye. Tuberculosis Rabbit hadn't even had a chance to see what was inside the haunted house when he felt the world go dark for a moment before finding himself outside it again. And a voice in his ear announced the successful completion of the haunted house challenge, rewarding 3 amusement park points. However, the accelerator might have been pushed too hard. Chen Yi looked up at the huge lollipop that was slowly falling over after being whacked hard by the elk's head, and then back down at the elk's head that didn't show any sign of damage, and he couldn't help but say, "It's really impact resistant." The next second, the little sprite, which had been licking the lollipop, watched the lollipop slowly fall and its clear eyes gradually replaced by a bloodthirsty gleam. Ding! The little sprite has turned into the Great Demon due to the destruction of its lollipop. Note: the Great Demon's mode of attack is to play idiom word chain. There are a total of 30 rounds. Discover stories with Empire. If you don't respond within 10 seconds, you die according to the rules. If you complete all 30 rounds, the Great Demon will return to clarity and revert back to the little sprite, and you will receive a special reward. The voice in the ear had barely finished. Chen Yi heard the Great Demon, now fully transformed and hovering over the amusement park, bellow in anger. Sugared tongue, honeyed mouth. Chapter 54. Tuberculosis Rabbit, didn't you say you've never been to school? What the heck is this? Chen Yi, who had already turned the sleigh around and was ready to crack the whip on the reindeer, was stunned for a moment, somewhat failing to react right away. The boss's attack method turns out to be a game of Chinese idiom solitaire? Isn't that a bit too childish? Since when does a boss attack by playing idiom solitaire? Shouldn't becoming a boss mean being a bit more bloody and brutal? Read exclusive adventures at Empire. But the countdown in the void had not stopped, it had already begun counting down. 10, 9, 8. Chen Yi had no time to think further, and without any hesitation, he blurted out. A glib tongue. Playing idiom solitaire with an idiom that starts with mouth was relatively easy, but now it should be the boss's turn to respond. What idioms start with river? As he was pondering this, he suddenly realized the boss's bloodthirsty eyes had shifted direction and were staring straight at Tuberculosis Rabbit beside him, and the countdown had begun anew. And the idiom displayed in the midair screen had changed as well. A glib tongue. This damn thing turns out to be a boss with an area of effect attack? A slight twitch emerged at the corner of Chen Yi's mouth. He felt like he had figured out the boss's attack method. This boss actually had an area of effect attack, which meant every round required each person to take a turn. There are only so many common idioms, and there were dozens of people here. If dozens of people each took turns, after 30 rounds, they would probably all be wiped out. Not one would survive. Just as he was about to speak and remind Tuberculosis Rabbit of some idioms that start with river, he saw Tuberculosis Rabbit suddenly stand up, raise his right hand, and roar. The river runs to the sea and dries up. Hey! Chen Yi was slightly stunned, then asked reflexively, Tuberculosis Rabbit, didn't you never go to school? Oh! Tuberculosis Rabbit touched his nose, looking slightly embarrassed as he said, funny story, one website I used required a CAPTCHA that involved arranging jumbled idioms into correct ones. I had to log in more than a dozen times daily. Gradually I got to know quite a few idioms. Don't worry, Yi, leave the rest to me. I'll take care of him. But why did you raise your hand? Cough, I don't know why I did that. Anyway, Yi, stop fretting about that and go check on the kid in the sleeping bag. He seems unable to wake up. At that moment, the boss's eyes began shifting targets, staring intently at Li Tianzhou lying in the sleeping bag, and the countdown commenced. The river runs to the sea and dries up. 10, 9, 8. Li Tianzhou inside the sleeping bag was oblivious to what was happening outside. To get through the haunted house, he had used a magic item for sleeping and was now snoring thunderously inside the bag. Unaware that his life was entering a 10-second countdown. It looks like he's beyond saving. Tuberculosis Rabbit said with a somewhat sentimental expression of regret, there's nothing that can be done. We can't answer for him, he's sleeping too soundly, and can't be woken up. Everyone has their destiny, and his is not good. By this time, the countdown had already reached 5. The players standing not far from the haunted house were also casting their gaze with slightly pale faces at the giant white sleeping bag on the sleigh. Everyone knew Li Tianzhou was doomed. But what they were more concerned about was whether the boss was only attacking the three who had collided with the lollipop, or whether they were also included in the area of effect. Each person took a turn, for a total of 30 rounds. The tall man at the front of the crowd, his complexion ugly, his voice wavering with a hint of a sob, said, "I can accept any form of death, but I can't accept dying because of a lack of knowledge. This cause of death is too humiliating. How will I face my ancestors after I go down? I've passed the age where I stood in the classroom hallway, hands in pockets, head tilted back, having memorized the preface to the Pavilion of Prince Tang first thing in the morning. When it's your turn, try not to use idioms with an overly obscure last character. Leave some room for survival for both parties." The people around exchanged glances. Although there was still some fear and panic in their eyes, they reached a basic consensus, which was to try not to use idioms with an overly obscure last character. And then, when the countdown had come to the last 2 seconds. "That's it. I'm laughing!" Chen Yi roared, and a shadow of a faceless man suddenly rose up behind him. The shadow, roughly 5 meters tall, stood in the air behind Chen Yi's head, one hand on his hip, the other pointing at the bloodthirsty demon in the sky, began furiously insulting it with his head tilted back. "Your mother, stupid dog! Mom! Dad!" The countdown that was originally hanging in the sky with only 1 second suddenly stopped, accompanied by the boss head slowly turning to look at Chen Yi, with a hint of cruelty and anger in its bloodthirsty eyes. The brutal voice rang out again in the sky above the amusement park. "The river dries up and the sea withers. 10, 9, 8. It worked." Chen Yi breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. His title effect, "That's it. I'm laughing," allowed him to summon a mouthpiece to insult the boss, and forcibly taunt the boss. He was initially uncertain if this taunting effect would work on a boss whose attack method was a game of word chain with idioms. Unexpectedly, it was actually effective. In that case, Li Tianzhou in the sleeping bag also managed to avoid disaster in his sleep. "Clouds cover the sun." As he finished speaking, a burst of white light also suddenly flashed above Chen Yi's head, illuminating the area around him brightly. The lighting effect of this title wasn't too bad, actually. "That." Tuberculosis Rabbit frowned and looked up at the shadow behind Chen Yi. "Yi, isn't your mouthpiece a bit too filthy with its insults? Shouldn't it be more skillful, like beating around the bush, using allusions, or being satirical or something? This thing is outright insulting, as if it's going to desecrate someone's entire lineage." Day ends, path exhausted. Indeed, the boss didn't target Tuberculosis Rabbit or Li Tianzhou again, but once more turned its gaze to him. This title effect is really strong. After Chen Yi breathed a sigh of relief, he thought for a while before speaking again. "Militarism." The idiom chain went round after round. With the help of Tuberculosis Rabbit, Chen Yi narrowly made it through over 20 rounds, and when it came to vocabulary of idioms, Tuberculosis Rabbit was even slightly better than him. After all, he did not frequent little websites that required jumbled idioms as CAPTCHA codes. But it seemed like the boss's vocabulary in idioms was very substantial, as it didn't get stuck at all. Soon, an idiom emerged once again on the screen in the sky. "Consistent." This time, Chen Yi didn't hesitate for a moment and blurted out. "1 counts as 2. 1 counts as 2 is a black hole in idioms. There are no idioms that can follow 1 counts as 2. Chapter 55. It's not clean, but eating it won't make you sick. Maybe you should try persuading her?" However, the next second. Ding, 1 top 2 isn't a proverb, please player Chen Yi replace the option. Damn. Chen Yi shook his head with some regret before continuing, "Take the lead." Not long after, the 30 rounds of proverbs were successfully completed. And once again, a prompt sounded beside Chen Yi's ear. Ding, the great demon has now regained clarity and returned to being a little sprite. Players Chen Yi and Tuberculosis Rabbit will receive a special reward. And the demon floating above the entire amusement park began to shrink rapidly until it turned back into a little sprite, sitting atop the broken lollipop. Read latest stories on Empire. About halfway the height of a person. Curling up its legs, burying its head in its arms, its transparent wings wrapped around itself, softly sobbing. The whole scene seemed especially sad. It's starkly different from the bloodthirsty and frenzied great demon that had been hovering above the amusement park just moments before, impossible to associate the two together. And at this moment, the verbal shadow behind Chen Yi, still unabated, continued to wave a single hand at the waist and loudly scold the little sprite squatting on the lollipop, with an excited expression. "You, little dog!" Chen Yi turned and glanced at the verbal shadow behind him, feeling somewhat speechless. That cursing was too dirty, he was almost unable to keep listening. This thing could persist for a full 30 minutes. But thankfully, it could be turned off voluntarily. Just as he chose to turn off this tidal effect. The verbal shadow seemed reluctant to leave, wiping its mouth before slowly fading away. Tuberculosis Rabbit, witnessing the slow disappearance of the verbal shadow, couldn't help but speak up with emotion after it dispersed. "I originally thought that his forced taunt attack was some kind of game judgment, belonging to the rules. Now it seems, it's completely on a physical level of mockery. It's entirely through physical ridicules to taunt the enemy. It reminds me of the time when I played games before, and I typed to tell the Dragon Turtle support to taunt the opposing ad, and the guy opened the public chat channel and went on a tirade for 30 minutes. In the last team fight, the 5 enemies didn't care about anything but to kill the Dragon Turtle. The next day, the public chat feature was removed. After the boss regained clarity, the players watching from a distance all let out a sigh of relief at the same time. Their hearts had been in their throats just a moment ago. With each proverb the boss said, they all silently pondered in their hearts, seeing if they could follow up. The conclusion they reached was, certain death. Fortunately, the brother with a dozen titles on his head stood until the end. If that brother had fallen, they would have been implicated, and they were not confident that they could withstand that many rounds of proverb chains. As expected of a man who could acquire so many titles, even his vocabulary of proverbs was so abundant. The eyes of many looking at Chen Yi held a hint of gratitude. From a certain perspective, Chen Yi had also saved their lives. Tuberculosis Rabbit fumbled in his trouser pocket and pulled out a cigarette, gripping it between his fingers and hesitantly pointing towards the little sprite squatting on the lollipop not far away. "What should we do about this?" Ever since the little sprite regained clarity, it had no aggression, squatting on the lollipop and sobbing quietly. The crying wasn't loud but was enough for the two of them to hear. It was truly moving, making it hard to control the softness in their hearts. Chen Yi looked down at the giant lollipop lying on the ground, hesitating with some uncertainty. "The lollipop isn't shattered either, it's just fallen on the ground, covered in a bit of dust. As the saying goes, what's not clean won't make you ill if you eat it, so why don't you try and console her?" "Me?" Tuberculosis Rabbit's face immediately dropped, his voice carrying a whine. "I've done all sorts of things in my life, but this is truly my first time trying to console a child. I really don't know how. Give it a try." "Well, okay then." Tuberculosis Rabbit hesitated for a while, fumbled in his arms, took out a honey peach flavored carrot, and walked towards the little sprite not far away with large strides. As Tuberculosis Rabbit pulled out that carrot, the moose that had been lying on the ground suddenly flashed a look of awakened terror in its eyes, jumped up, and buried its head directly into the sleigh. Chen Yi, who noticed this scene, nodded thoughtfully without speaking. "Hey!" Holding the carrot in his hand, Tuberculosis Rabbit squatted in front of the little sprite and tentatively spoke, "Stop crying, okay? We apologize. Uncle has a tastier carrot here for you. Do you want to eat it? It's definitely a flavor you've never tried before." The sobs of the little sprite suddenly stopped, and a small gap appeared between the translucent wings that enveloped her. A small, cute head gently lifted to look at the carrot in Tuberculosis Rabbit's hand. She sniffed lightly, and a clear longing to taste it welled up in her eyes. Then she looked up with begging, watery eyes at Tuberculosis Rabbit, her face saying, "I want it." Tuberculosis Rabbit was a bit caught off guard, but still quickly handed over the carrot. "Here, try the flavor. It's unique in this world." He couldn't help but be amazed afterward. Are all kids this easy to appease? I always thought kids were a handful. Had I known a carrot could solve everything, why did you have to turn hostile earlier, scaring the heck out of us? Speaking of which, you're so young, yet you know so many idioms. Did your parents enroll you in a lot of extra classes or something? In almost just 10 seconds. The little sprite had finished munching on the carrot in her hands. She got up contentedly, patted her belly, and then took out a new lollipop from her embrace and stuffed it into her mouth. However, this lollipop wasn't that big, it was just the size of a normal one. She also took out a small card the size of a bank card from her embrace, handed it to Tuberculosis Rabbit seriously, patted her chest, and nodded emphatically with slightly puffed cheeks. It was extremely earnest. Prop name, the little sprite's singular delight. Prop level, no level. Prop effect, when you encounter a crisis, you can activate this card once, and the little sprite will transform into the great demon to help you attack the enemy in front of you. Prop usage count, 1/1. Prop introduction, collect 3 little sprites delight, and you can exchange for 1 little fairy's mom's delight. Right after that, before Tuberculosis Rabbit could say anything more, the little sprite in front of him turned into a shadowy figure and disappeared on the spot. And all players heard another notification in their ears. Chanel Amusement Park will close in 3 hours. Please ensure you leave in time. It's closing soon. Chen Yi raised an eyebrow and called out to the players watching not far away, anyone with negative points. A group of 7 or 8 players with previously pale faces filled with fear suddenly rose up with hope as they heard this and began shouting urgently. Me. Tuberculosis Rabbit, you go. Chen Yi nonchalantly took a cigarette from his embrace, put it in his mouth, and said casually, knock them out and throw them into the sleigh, take them to earn some points. Those without negative points too, knock them out. Let them earn some points in other attractions, to claim some rewards. We can't finish all the rewards ourselves anyway, so let's let everyone get some. It'd be a waste to leave them here. As these words fell, all the players looked ecstatically at Chen Yi, full of gratitude as they unanimously roared. Bro, you rock. Thank you, bro. If there's an afterlife, I'd be willing to be your ox and horse. If we meet again outside, I'll definitely help wherever I can. Tuberculosis Rabbit pulled out a wooden stick from his embrace, skillfully wrapped the head of the stick with a towel, slung it over his shoulder, and looked at the group of players still reveling with a gleam of gratification in his eyes, slowly beginning to grin sinisterly. Thank you all, my brothers. Line up properly, and you, the tallest guy, you go first. Chapter 56. Special Limited Title X1, Nags Use TX1. Bang, bang, bang. The increasingly skilled Tuberculosis Rabbit, with one swing of his club, knocked out all the players present and then stuffed them into the sled. The sled had only 8 seats. There was definitely not enough room to sit that many people, so they had to be stuffed in. A little on top, a bit in the front, and some more in the back, and almost dozens of people could be crammed into the sled. Afterwards, the reindeer began to pull the sled on its own, aiming for 7 ins and outs of the haunted house. Pretty intelligent. At least much better than the original mechanical elk. Sometimes, living things are indeed a bit more useful than non-living ones. Meanwhile, Chen Yi stood in front of the haunted house, checking the special reward he had just successfully secured from surviving the Great Demon's clutches. Ding! The Great Demon has regained clarity and returned to being a little sprite. Players Chen Yi and Tuberculosis Rabbit will receive a special reward. Special Limited Title X1, Nags Use TX1. Title Name, Idiom Solitaire King. Title Level, Blue. Title Effect, when you speak idioms, your voice will become clear and sonorous. Title Source, successfully cleared 30 rounds of Idiom Solitaire with the Great Demon. Chen Yi nodded silently, casually placing the title atop his head. The title wasn't very useful, just by looking at the effect, it was pretty much on the same level as the Lightning Reflexes title effect. As for the Nags Use T, that was a bit strange. Prop Name, Nags Use T. Prop Level, E Grade. Prop Effect, you can taste 12 cups of fruit tea with different flavors. After using it 12 times, the prop will automatically destroy itself. Prop Introduction, you know? Holding a cup of milk tea in your left hand and brandishing a long sword in your right hand while slaying monsters, that's really cool. Also a somewhat useless item, it seems that the threat level of this boss isn't very high, so the rewards given out seem a little weak. As Chen Yi pondered, he brought the straw of his cup of milk tea to his mouth. Strawberry mulberry flavor, not bad, just a bit too much slush. And just at that moment, the endlessly spinning sled finally came to a stop. Tuberculosis Rabbit, walking down from the sled, looked up at Chen Yi and was about to speak when he saw the milk tea in Yi's hand and felt a bit puzzled, instinctively glancing around. Does the delivery rider even reach here? It's a system reward. Check your system notifications, you'll have one too. Really? I'll have a look. A moment later, Tuberculosis Rabbit, also holding a cup of milk tea in his hands, contentedly squatted next to Yi. Sour citrus flavor, I like it, but there's a bit too much slush. At this time, the players who had been knocked out on the sled also woke up one after another. When they saw Chen Yi standing there drinking milk tea, and Tuberculosis Rabbit squatting next to Chen Yi drinking milk tea, they were all a bit puzzled, and for a moment, they couldn't look away, looking confused. These kids! Tuberculosis Rabbit was somewhat speechlessly spitting out the orange seeds from his mouth to the side before looking up at those players on the sled still in a daze, saying with slight annoyance. What are you waiting for standing there? Waiting for me to come over and share it with you? You've racked up so many points, go use them. What are you looking at? As the words ended, the players who had just woken up on the sled also realized what was happening and hastily rushed into the other amusement activities to start earning rewards. The rules for all amusement activities were basically the same as the spinning coffee chairs. As long as you successfully complete them, you will get a reward. Failure, however, would result in points being deducted. That is to say, points couldn't actually be directly exchanged for rewards but could be simply understood as something akin to a ticket. They had looked over them. There wasn't anything good. But driven by the principle of not wasting a free offer, Tuberculosis Rabbit still rushed over excitedly and started to claim rewards from each of the attractions. It was a pity for Li Tianzhou, who still lay in his sleeping bag, missing such a good opportunity to rack up rewards as he continued to sleep soundly. 3 hours later, Chen Yi and his party left the amusement park before the countdown ended. And as they were leaving, those gamers who had received Chen Yi's kindness all looked towards him with gratitude on their faces, continuously thanking him while declaring that if they ever met again, as long as they could be of use, they would definitely lend a hand. Chen Yi didn't mind, he just waved his hand and left. After all, they came from all corners of the world to this amusement park. It was uncertain whether they would ever meet again, so he didn't have any expectations about being repaid or not. But the rewards were there for the taking, and it would be a waste not to take them. It wasn't much trouble, just a little effort. As for Li Tianzhou, he remained asleep, still in the sleeping bag. They left Li Tianzhou in that coffee shop, explained the situation to his subordinates who were the baristas there, and then they departed. When they stepped out of the coffee shop, the sky had reached the afternoon. The sun had begun its descent. Standing on the street, Tuberculosis Rabbit looked towards the crowd, pulled out a cigarette from his pocket, put it in his mouth, and with a contemplative look on his face, he smacked his lips at the somewhat hot air around him. The weather is getting hotter, hey? Yeah. Chen Yi nodded. He, too, took a cigarette from his pocket and was about to put it in his mouth when suddenly he saw a black dot in the distance moving at a very fast speed from above the city, heading inward. The progression was of a stop-and-go kind. Looking closely, the rapidly moving black dot was unmistakably a scantily clad little lass, and following her, also in a stop-and-go shooting fashion, was a brawny man well over 2 meters tall. The two were like quantum entangled, pulling and dragging each other from the outskirts at a very fast speed towards Yanchinj. If they weren't Tai Chui and that little lass, who else could they be? So far, he had only seen this duo deploy such a combo move. Though without a vehicle, they were better than a vehicle. It could be said to be a higher level of flight than sword flight, manned flight. Perhaps it was Chen Yi's 12 constantly shining titles above his head that were especially conspicuous in the crowd, creating a visual effect similar to that of navigation lights at an airport when seen from the high altitude. The sibling pair, who were previously rushing toward the city's interior, turned their heads and dove straight towards Chen Yi. Snap! All he saw was a flash before his eyes. The scantily clad little lass was tossed straight down in front of Chen Yi by Tai Chui from mid-air, just before hitting the ground. Tai Chui's figure once again appeared out of thin air beneath the little girl's body. He landed securely, at the same time catching the girl unharmed on his shoulder. Quite a move, combo technique. They really ought to be given spacesuits and tasked with the mission of exploring the outer edges of the universe. Chen Yi internally made a sarcastic comment. Yi, there's trouble. The little lass sitting on Tai Chui's shoulder looked somewhat anxious as she stared at Chen Yi and waved her hands frantically, saying, "There's trouble outside the city." Chapter 57. Come to think of it, there's no rule that says Blue Star can't have children, right? The Tuberculosis Rabbit silently pinched out the cigarette in his hand and tossed it underfoot, pointing toward the nearby patrolling law enforcement bureau. If there's trouble, look for them. It's no use coming to us. No, that's not it. The little loli jumped down from Tai Chui's shoulders urgently and looked up at Chen Yi with a worried expression. Have you ever cooked instant noodles? Yet. Then you must have fried sunny-side-up eggs, right? The ground outside the suburbs looks just like a cracked open sunny-side-up egg. It took Chen Yi a while to grasp the awkward metaphor before he couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth slightly. I think I understand. You're saying there's a patch of ground that's cracked open. Yes, yes. Like a sunny-side-up egg. Exactly. Got it. Chen Yi dug out the sleigh from his backpack and threw it on the ground. Come on, get in the car, let's go have a look together. This. The little lowly hesitated while staring at the sleigh. Isn't this the mechanical moose Christmas sleigh from the global vehicle leaderboard? Is this thing fast? Let me take you instead. I'm a bit faster. No need, get on, just point the way. Alright then. The sleigh ascended slowly with Chen Yi and everyone on board, floating above the city, and turned the vehicle's nose toward the hill that the little lowly was pointing at. The next second. It was as if time had stopped. The scenery around them swiftly became unreal and flew past them. It only took a short dozen seconds or so. The sleigh then floated above a large mountain. Is this the place? Chen Yi sat on the sleigh, sticking his head out to look down, only to see that the plain at the foot of the mountain indeed showed signs of cracking. A crack about 3 meters wide and nearly several hundred meters long suddenly appeared on the plain. And this crack was continuing to widen. It appeared extremely eerie. This is the place. The little lowly's expression was clearly anxious as she worriedly said, it wasn't this big when we left. At this rate, it feels like it won't be long before the land beneath our feet is split in two. Really? The tuberculosis rabbit, somewhat disagreeing, pulled out a chocolate-flavored carrot from his chest and crunched into it. No matter how I look at it, this thing resembles giving birth. Come to think of it, nobody has ruled out that Blue Star can't give birth, right? Maybe in the next second, a little blue star, covered in blood, will jump out of the crack. Bro, there. Different from the little lowly's full-faced worry, Tai Chui was completely unconcerned about the crack below. He only took out a cigarette and offered it to Chen Yi after seeing Chen Yi had a moment to himself. He stuttered with a smile on his face, cigarette, good cigarette. Thanks. Read latest chapters on Empire. Chen Yi took the cigarette, held it in his hand, and met Tai Chui's gaze with a smile, nodding his head without saying anything superfluous. And at that moment, the crack on the ground suddenly spurted out a large amount of blood water, which was not very thick, looking more like blood mixed with a lot of pure water. Good grief! Witnessing this scene, the tuberculosis rabbit nearly choked to death on the carrot in his mouth, coughing violently a few times before expressing his disbelief with utter shock. No way, did it really give birth? Following that, the crack suddenly widened horizontally again, and it only stopped when it had reached about 20 meters in width. Then, under the watchful eyes of Chen Yi and the others, a pyramid slowly rose from the ground, completely covering the entire crack and standing perfectly on the surface. It was said to be a pyramid. But it might be a bit different from the pyramids people are familiar with. This pyramid was about 200 meters long, 20 meters wide, and looked like a triangular prism-shaped hot dog. It felt more like something that should be displayed in a showcase rather than on the ground. Let's go. Chen Yi hesitated only slightly before making a decision. Let's go down and have a look. The sleigh gently landed on the ground. It stopped right in front of the entrance of the pyramid. Yes, as they descended, they discovered that this pyramid was not completely sealed and symmetrical. There was a rather tall stone door on one of its sides. It looked like an entrance. The entire pyramid was brown in color, made up of huge square stones piled upon one another. It appeared quite ancient under the setting sun. The small amount of blood that had sprayed out from the crack before was now completely pressed under the pyramid, leaving no trace to be seen. Chen Yi, standing at the entrance of the pyramid with one hand on his cane, scanned his surroundings. There were no signs of change to be seen here. This pyramid had perfectly merged with the ground, making it seem as if it had always been here since ancient times. The entrance of the pyramid in front of them was about 10 meters high, occupying about a quarter of the pyramid's total height. Its width was around 5 meters. It was large enough to allow a 100-ton vehicle to pass through easily. However, there was no door at the entrance, just an empty space, and since there was no light inside, it was impossible to see what was there. One could only feel a continuous cool breeze blowing out from the entrance. On the wall of the pyramid to the left of the entrance, there was a huge screen displaying clear information about the pyramid. Map name, Sands of Time. Map level, D level. Map content, it is said that tens of thousands of years ago, this pyramid already existed here. After it was built, it protected the local safety for 1,000 years, but for some reason, it was buried deep underground after that period, and many people were entombed alive within the pyramid. Map Introduction. This map is in an unexplored state. The player who successfully opens this map will receive a pioneer reward, and after the pioneering, all players with a Sands of Time pass, regardless of location, will be able to freely enter the Sands of Time. An unexplored map. Tuberculosis Rabbit nodded thoughtfully. Sounds like it's something similar to Chanel Amusement Park. But then again, we've completed the Chanel Amusement Park map, and I didn't see anything to do with the word Chanel. But the Chanel Amusement Park map is D-level, and this is also D-level. That map wasn't much of a threat, this one should be about the same. Yi, shall we go in and try it? Chen Yi furrowed his brow, leaning on his cane with one hand. He glanced subconsciously at the little lowly standing beside him, then silently put his cane away and pondered for a moment before speaking softly. Let's go, have a look inside. It wasn't that he was arrogant, but he truly felt that with his current strength, pioneering a D-level map should not be a problem. The entrance before them was quite dark, as if it swallowed all the light. Logically, with the sun not yet set outside, the entrance shouldn't be so dark. Although his title had a lighting effect, it could only illuminate the surrounding area for a certain distance, and could not light up very far. They had penetrated about 50 meters into the entrance, but the visibility remained very low. There was nothing around to gather any useful information from. There was also no sound of any prompts in their ears. Damn it! Tuberculosis Rabbit shouted confidently, and the title above his head emitted a burst of white light, illuminating a large area around them. The next second, Tuberculosis Rabbit glanced around at the nearly 100 dried corpses that had been originally hiding in the shadows, their eyes staring straight at him, and his body stiffened slightly as he said in a low voice without expression. Damn! Chapter 58. Strike the darkness with thunder. And in that moment when the dried corpses were illuminated by the light shining from Tuberculosis Rabbit's title above their heads. Before Chen Yi and the others had time to take a closer look at the dried corpses, they heard a prompt in their ears. Ding! You have discovered the existence of the dried corpses. The dried corpses will start to move in 1 minute. Please escape to the first activation point within 10 minutes. The following are some basic rules within this map. Please read them quickly and remember them by heart as soon as possible. 1. This map is in dark mode. Without external intervention, all players' visibility is limited to about 1 meter. Beyond 1 meter of vision, darkness prevails. 2. The dried corpses walking or running is silent, and they are not hindered by darkness. They can see the players' figures clearly and move at a speed roughly equivalent to that of an adult male. 3. The dried corpses have a breathing sound. When a dried corpse is within 5 meters of a player, the player will hear a clear breathing sound. 4. After coming into contact with a player 3 times, the player will become a dried corpse and be permanently imprisoned within the map. They will remain conscious and become one of the dried corpses until they successfully infect 3 other players, after which they can resume their player status and leave the map. 5. After a player becomes a dried corpse, titles, props, skills, etc., cannot be used anymore. 6. Once a player who has become a dried corpse successfully infects 3 other players, they can choose to resume their player identity or continue playing as a dried corpse to infect players entering the map, thereby obtaining substantial rewards and the privilege to resume player identity at any time. 7. Dried corpses within the map, as well as players who have become dried corpses, will possess the ability to resurrect indefinitely. 8. Within the map, any illumination props, non-prop lighting devices, and lighting skills, etc., cannot be used. 9. Players who fail to reach the activation point within the designated time, or do not successfully clear the map, will become dried corpses. A full list of 9 rules clearly explained the copy's rules. Damn! Tuberculosis Rabbit roared, feeling less fear in his heart after reading all the rules. He took a deep breath and then clicked his tongue. You scared me, I thought I'd encountered a mummy. But speaking of which, didn't you two think of that thing? He turned his head to look at Tai Chui and Ji beside him and asked with some curiosity. His inability to think of it was due to his naturally thick nerves. Those who could be friends with corpses were already immune to such things. Nope. The little lowly sitting on Tai Chui's shoulder shook her head, patted Tai Chui's head, and muttered, I hypnotized myself to think of those drunk people vomiting on the streets whenever I think of ghosts. That's disgusting. I hate it when I'm happily wearing my favorite dress, strolling in the evening, only to see such a disappointing scene in the tree pits on the street. As for Tai Chui, he can't use his brain. If he does, it hurts, so he can't think of these things at all. Heh heh. Tai Chui chuckled with a simple smile, nodding his head without knowing if he understood or not, but he seemed genuinely fearless. Oh, I see. Damn. Tuberculosis Rabbit roared again and then slightly discomforted, rubbed his throat, pulled out a fruit tea from his chest, and took a big gulp before he finally relaxed. Damn. By the way, didn't you tell us your names at that bun shop last time? I kind of forgot. Gee. Good name, not bad. Tuberculosis Rabbit licked the corner of his mouth, then looked around as darkness closed in again, and roared without temper. Damn. As his words ended, the surroundings were lit up once more. And now, as the 1-minute countdown ended, the dried corpses also began to move. Almost 100 dried corpses ran straight towards them. There was not a sound. The entire scene looked extremely eerie. Under the effect of the title Tuberculosis Rabbit, the character for Sun, though it could illuminate the surroundings within a 100-meter radius almost instantly, like a flare with excellent effect, could only last for about less than a second. This meant that, even if Tuberculosis Rabbit shouted Sun repeatedly, with the stamina of a normal person, it was very hard to achieve an uninterrupted effect, akin to a video with a dark background interspersed with several frames of pure white, playing on. The entire scene probably looked like this. Every time the light dispelled the darkness, those dried corpses would be a little closer to them. This process easily led to certain associations. Tuberculosis Rabbit rubbed his throat, drank down his fruit tea expressionlessly, pocketed the milk tea cup into his chest, and then sneered before starting to warm up by moving his body. This scene reminds me of some of the pointless videos that people used to share in the group chat. But that's not important. Yi, you guys focus on getting through this map. As for the illumination, just leave it to me, Tuberculosis Rabbit. Don't ever think that this is all there is to my strength. The warm-up has just begun. With those words, discover hidden stories at Empire. Tuberculosis Rabbit took a deep breath, then his facial expression turned icy as he began to roar in a rapid-fire manner like a machine gun. Sun, 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 sun. 1 second, 7 sun shouts. Without any interval of darkness, the entire space was lit up brightly. If this scene were captured by a high-definition camera and broken down frame by frame, one would find that there was not a single frame of darkness. This was his high-end game. He had never considered himself strong in any area, but in this respect, he didn't think anyone could surpass him. Where Tuberculosis Rabbit was, darkness would be devoured, and light would surely cover the land. Darkness shrouds all things, and he would be that last glimmer of dawn in the darkness. With thunder. Shatter the darkness. Gaia. Sun. At this time, those dried corpses surrounding them were only about less than 50 meters away. The dried corpses did not completely encircle them, there were quite a few gaps. In the night, players naturally couldn't discern where the gaps were, but under Tuberculosis Rabbit's continuous illumination, the gaps within the dried corpses were crystal clear. Chen Yi took out the Christmas cane from his chest and leaned on it. At the same time, a 2-meter diameter red patterned light ring appeared under his feet, looking particularly conspicuous. Walk forward. Without the slightest hesitation, Chen Yi chose a spot where there were fewer dried corpses and boldly took the lead. On the map not far from their position, there was a flickering green point. This green point should be the activation point mentioned in the rules that needed to be reached within 10 minutes. However, the map was pitch dark, only the vicinity of their few blue points was cleared. As they moved forward, this cleared distance on the map proceeded with them. Which meant that no matter how bright they illuminated the interior of the pyramid, the visibility on the map was still within 1 meter as per the rules. Chapter 59. Invincible under the heavens. Yi. Having only taken a few steps, Ji, sitting on Tai Chui's shoulders, made a suggestion, there's no need for such trouble. Why don't I let Tai Chui send us there? We'll be there soon, Chen Yi replied. With Ji and Tai Chui's abilities, one toss and retrieval was all that was needed to instantly move a considerable distance. They indeed arrived quickly. Most importantly, their combo move didn't even have a cooldown. As long as Tai Chui's strength wasn't exhausted, they could keep using it. No need. Chen Yi shook his head, having his own plans in mind. However, he still asked, that skill of yours that can disregard distance and terrain to pull people to your side, how many people can it bind? 1, Ji replied, holding up a finger and speaking with a serious and clear voice. And once bound, it can't be changed. Chen Yi hummed, nodding his head. His eyes narrowed slightly as he observed the path of the dried corpses in front of them. These dried corpses didn't seem to be advancing with them as their center point. They had their own tracks of movement. For example, those 3 dried corpses behind them were running farther and farther away from a spot 10 meters behind them, completely ignoring them. This meant that if players did not directly bump into the dried corpses face to face, the corpses would not actively pursue the players. But the visibility for normal players was only a meter, so the frequency of unfortunate face-to-face encounters should not be low. Chen Yi looked down at the patterns beneath his feet, nodding thoughtfully. This clearing was made up of 100 cm x 100 cm dark tiles laid throughout. Each dark tile bore a unique pattern, different from tile to tile, likely functioning to determine the direction of advancement to avoid the tracks of the dried corpses. This was the thought process for a normal player to clear the level. After all, normal players couldn't have an eternal light bulb by their side like he did, which, other than being a bit noisy, had no drawbacks. Information on the movement tracks of the dried corpses could be found through the patterns on these tiles. But it was unclear whether players who were infected and became dried corpses would follow these movement tracks. If not, the map would become chaotic in the future. The prospect of such a device being pioneered didn't feel quite right, to be honest. After gathering the rough information, Chen Yi finally glanced around and uttered softly, "Violators, annihilate 9 clans." As he spoke, the red patterned circle beneath exploded with light, suddenly expanding to twice its size before beginning to slowly rotate. A blood-red frozen throne slowly rose from beneath Chen Yi's feet, elevating him into the air. The armrests of the throne were covered with opaque, blood-red ice spikes, presenting a rather harrowing sight. As Chen Yi sat down, a voice carrying weary undertones, yet not sounding elderly but instead full of authority and bloodthirst, echoed within the pyramid's interior, ethereal as a voice from another world. "You insects have injured me. I've played enough with you, now taste the undead's vengeance." This was punctuated by an intimidating burst of mad laughter. All these were special effects and entrance BGM accompanying the activation of the title "Violators, Annihilate 9 Clans." After all, it was a red-level title. Having a few extra special effects was quite normal. While seated on the frozen throne, he could spend 10 points to summon a suit of armor-clad, long sword-wielding soldier, completely obedient to his commands, with no limits to the number of summons. The next second, 10 white orbs of light slowly emerged around the throne, solidifying along with the light to reveal 10 soldiers clad in heavy armor and holding long swords, who gradually landed on the ground. Following the direction pointed by Chen Yi's staff, they marched forward in formation. Boom, boom, boom. The uniform and muffled footsteps added a sense of oppression to the space. It didn't take them long. The soldiers approached several dried corpses. Draw sword, slash, sheath sword. Simplicity and crispness marked their uniform actions. The heads of the dried corpses were cleaved off almost without resistance, and their bodies collapsed powerlessly to the ground and were slowly absorbed by the patterns there. In just a few seconds, the bodies of the dried corpses had vanished. The 10 soldiers remained entirely unharmed and continued their unemotional advance. Soon, they had carved out a clear path. This. Sitting on Tai Chui's shoulders, Ji looked on in shock at the red circle of light at Chen Yi's feet, the thoroughly crimson frozen throne, as well as the dozens of soldiers he had summoned, with the grandiose sound effects of the throne's arrival still echoing in her ears. Her gaze was slightly hazy as she looked towards Chen Yi, who sat expressionless on the throne, and murmured softly. "What is this feeling of being both embarrassing and cool? Damn!" Noticing Ji's subtle expressions, the tuberculosis rabbit standing beside the throne excitedly clenched its fist and roared with a triumphant air, "Damn!" Roar! Infected by tuberculosis rabbit's emotions, Tai Chui couldn't help but laugh excitedly as he lifted Ji's legs in his hands and, like a shot put, began to energetically spin her around. Roar, roar, roar! It was some time later, when Ji finally stopped spinning, she took a breath, casually straightened her bangs, and continued to sit on Tai Chui's shoulders as if nothing had happened. No big deal, she was used to it. She comforted herself vigorously in her mind. Tai Chui wasn't very smart, so to coordinate with him and use their combo move, she had to employ some trickery, convincing Tai Chui that swinging her around by the legs was a very affectionate game she enjoyed. Only by doing so could she ensure that Tai Chui would throw her out at a critical moment. But clearly, there were some side effects, like Tai Chui seemingly becoming addicted to this game. Having such a brother, she really had a tough fate. Soon, the dried corpses on the path from the throne to the first activation point had already been cleared, and no matter how many times they attacked the soldiers, they could not convert them into dried corpses. It seems that summoned creatures or puppets could not be infected and turned into dried corpses. However, the dried corpses did revive quickly and began to move again along their track towards a certain direction, but this time protected by 2 rows of soldiers, 5 in each row. This ensured that the path between the frozen throne and the first activation point remained unobstructed. Thus, Chen Yi had practically obtained all the information about the first challenge. And at this moment, Ji, who had successfully reached the activation point while sitting on Tai Chui's shoulders, turned and looked back over 100 meters to Chen Yi, who was still sitting on the frozen throne, waving her hand with a puzzled expression and calling out loudly, "Yi! Aren't you coming?" Chen Yi sat on the frozen throne, silent and expressionless, not speaking. The situation was a bit awkward. The soldiers he had summoned could only exist as long as the throne existed. But the problem was the throne couldn't move, and when he stood up to move, so did the throne, causing the soldiers to vanish, and the path that had been clear was no longer so. If it had been just Tuberculosis Rabbit alone, it might have been okay. But the problem was that there were 2 pairs of eyes watching him, and he didn't want to find himself in too embarrassing a position. After a long silence, Chen Yi stood up from the throne with a calm expression, supported himself with his staff as he stepped onto the red patterned ring of light and looked towards the nearby activation point, speaking softly. "Invincible under the heavens." The next second, a supreme and semi-transparent yellow staircase sprawled from the throne as the starting point to the activation point as the end, spreading wildly. He paused for a moment. Then, relying on his staff, with a hint of a mysterious smile playing on his lips, a straight figure with one hand in his pocket, he stepped onto the suddenly appeared staircase, moving towards the activation point in measured and rhythmic strides. The instant Chen Yi stepped onto the staircase, the throne behind him also began to slowly crumble into crimson fragments and disappear on the spot. At the same time, a sudden flash of deep blue lightning streaked through Chen Yi's eyes, adding a touch of mystery and aloofness to his demeanor. Power may be lacking, but special effects must be maxed out. Chapter 60. 1 minute on stage takes 10 years of practice off stage. Ding! All players have arrived at the first stage activation point. Please proceed to the second activation point within 10 minutes. Let's go. Chen Yi, with one hand in his pocket and leaning on a cane, stood still and looked nonchalantly at Ji on Tai Chui's shoulder. "Ah. Oh, yeah, sure." Ji, who hadn't reacted at first, felt his ears turn slightly red as he stammered an uncertain response, eyes flitting about. When Chen Yi and the others were all standing at the activation point, bang! A sound, not too loud or soft, like a muffled fart, exploded in the space, and instantly the darkness that filled the space retreated, and light from an unknown source illuminated the entire area. Chen Yi absorbed every detail of his surroundings. The activation point they were standing on was a cylinder about 1 meter high from the ground, capable of accommodating about a dozen people simultaneously. The cylinder was covered in patterns, lending it a mysterious aura. The entire space was about the size of 4 football fields put together in a 2x2 arrangement. While they stood upon this cylinder, the dried corpses below suddenly stopped in their tracks, turned their heads in unison towards Chen Yi and his group, their eyes beginning to glow red. The next second, without any hesitation, the dried corpses charged towards Chen Yi and the others. At the same time, the light in the entire space vanished in an instant, and darkness once again enveloped the land. In the moment before darkness fell, their last glimpse was of the dried corpses rushing towards them. Darkness had returned. No sound was heard, no dried corpses were seen. But everyone knew in their hearts that a horde of dried corpses was racing towards them in the darkness. And this time, these dried corpses didn't seem to follow any fixed trajectory, instead, their target was much clearer. Their target was them. The visibility of their vision was once again restricted to just 1 meter. Accompanying this change, the cylinder beneath their feet began to tremble slightly. Soon after, a passage built entirely of stone bricks rose slowly from the ground, appearing before their eyes, with an entrance right in front of them, flush with the surface of the cylinder. The entire passage inclined upwards. According to the direction of the second activation point on the map, the meaning was clear. Run! Without any hesitation, Chen Yi was the first to dive into the passage. The passage was full of steps. Each step was about half a meter wide and around 20 centimeters high, quite large steps, fortunately without moss or anything that might cause slips. Damn! Tuberculosis Rabbit let out a terse growl before quickly lighting up a cigarette and taking hurried puffs. After several more shouts and a glance at the dried corpses rapidly pursuing them below the cylinder, he cursed under his breath and hurried into the passage to catch up with Yi's pace. It wasn't that he was complaining about the close chase. He just found the dark rules of the map utterly nasty. Though a chatterbox, it didn't mean he enjoyed talking non-stop, especially repeating the same meaningless monosyllable. He didn't even have the time to take a drag from his cigarette. Luckily, he had practiced this skill, the speed of lighting a cigarette and taking a drag taking only 0.7 seconds, allowing him to sneak a puff between two curses. This skill was almost as simple as performing a light-speed QA. That's the meaning of hard work. 1 minute on stage requires 10 years of work off stage. The passage was not low in height, at least allowing Tai Chui, with his stature, to move forward without any obstruction. It was just a bit oppressive. They were surrounded by stone bricks on all sides, and although there was plenty of oxygen, the psychological pressure was still immense. The passageway was a straight ascent with no sign of turning. Damn! After growling softly, Tuberculosis Rabbit turned to look back. The dried corpses had already entered the passage and were rushing toward them in a crowded frenzy. Their running speed seemed faster than during the first level. At least, if they continued running straight forward without any special measures, and if there was still a long way to go in this passageway, they would definitely be overtaken. This can only happen to us. With a somewhat emotional click of his tongue, Tuberculosis Rabbit said, not many other players have a title like Quaffo chasing the sun, especially in complete darkness. Knowing only that dried corpses are chasing you, but having no idea how far away they really are. Surrounded by silence, with vision obstructed, and no idea how long the passageway will go on. That's a lot of psychological pressure. It's probably terrifying to the extreme. At this moment, the dried corpses were only less than 50 meters away from them in a straight line. And looking at the location of the second activation point on the map, there was still a long way to go in this passageway. Continuing to run was not an option, they would be caught sooner or later. They had to stop and deal with these dried corpses before doing anything else. At this time, Chen Yi suddenly halted and looked at a red control lever on the wall of the passageway ahead. There was also a small screen next to it. Activate this control lever to lower a stone wall behind you, which can block the dried corpses for 10 seconds. Is that so? Chen Yi nodded thoughtfully, grabbed the control lever with one hand, and pulled it down forcefully. Immediately, a stone wall fell behind them in the passageway, blocking the dried corpse's path. He didn't say much but continued to lead the way forward. In fact, if he wanted to get through this passage quickly, he had many ways to do it. For example, have Ji use their combo to easily carry them out. Or use a mirror. And so on. He just wanted to understand more about the rules of this map. It wasn't long before the stone wall retracted, and that group of dried corpses continued their relentless chase, seemingly moving even faster. After just 100 meters, Chen Yi found 3 small, glowing objects on the floor of the passage. Only upon approaching did he realize they were several grenades. Prop name, Dried Corpse Grenade. Prop level, none. Prop effect, can cause high damage to dried corpses or other monsters, but can't harm players. Prop restriction, can't be taken out of the map, only usable within the Sands of Time map. P.S. For every dried corpse killed, you will receive 1 Sands of Time point. After clearing the map, Sands of Time points can be exchanged for rewards in the shop. And at this time, the dried corpses behind them were now less than 5 meters away. Chen Yi picked up a grenade, weighed it in his hand, pulled out the pin, and threw it at the feet of the group of dried corpses deep in the passageway. The next second, boom! A tremendous explosion rang out suddenly deep within the passage. Under Tuberculosis Rabbit's illumination, those dried corpses were visibly blown to pieces by the massive shockwave, turning into flesh that scattered on the steps of the passage and slowly got absorbed into it. A series of rapid kill notifications kept sounding urgently next to Chen Yi's ear. Chapter 61. Solid as a rock. Just one strike. The dried corpses that had been chasing them were completely obliterated, and the huge shockwave that swept past them was as gentle as the spring breeze. It wasn't harmful in the slightest, but instead, there was a refreshing sensation. They're coming back. A hint of strangeness flashed across Tuberculosis Rabbit's eyes as he pointed towards the steps around 50 meters behind them. The dried corpses they had just killed were resurrecting themselves once more, 50 meters away from them. And they continued to sprint towards them. Ordinary players might not catch this information due to limited vision, but they could see everything clearly. Chen Yi pocketed the remaining 2 grenades carelessly and sprinted forward again. Finally, after the last 2 grenades had been utilized, they also saw the end of the passageway. The resurrecting dried corpses were only less than 20 meters away from them now. Emerging from the end of the passage, they saw a platform suspended in mid-air. At the end of the platform, there was a pole, from which a cable connected it to another pole on a higher platform. Beneath the cable was a cable car that looked like it could hold dozens of people. The cable car was quietly stationed at the platform's departure point, constantly flickering with white light, and even without Tuberculosis Rabbit's illumination, it was clearly visible in the darkness. It was almost as if it had the words "Hurry up and ride me" engraved on its surface. This map doesn't seem very difficult, does it? Chen Yi glanced at the dried corpses sprinting towards them from behind and stepped towards the cable car. He pressed the green departure button inside the cable car once Tuberculosis Rabbit and the others had boarded. It feels like even ordinary players would have a good chance of passing easily if they just coordinate a little better. Although they passed the first level by relying on their own abilities, if it were ordinary players, by following the patterns on the ground, they could have easily avoided the dried corpses. After all, the dried corpses in the first level had fixed movement patterns. Being a little careful and concentrating a bit shouldn't pose much of a problem. As for the second level, they didn't use any of their own abilities at all, but relied on the control lever that could lower a stone wall and the 3 dried corpse grenades they found in the depths of the corridor, successfully escaping from the passage. And they made it onto the cable car successfully. The moment he pressed the departure button, the cable car trembled slightly and then started ascending slowly along the cable towards the higher platform. Not bad. Tuberculosis Rabbit nodded, peering over the edge of the cable car and down below, just didn't see where the power source for this cable car is. But then again, this map must be an unauthorized expansion, right? From what we saw outside, the pyramid doesn't seem like it could contain such a large map, does it? And also, Tuberculosis Rabbit suddenly stopped, his expression a bit odd as he pointed behind them at the cable. It looks like those dried corpses have some skills. The dried corpses that had chased them out of the passageway were now bouncing onto the cables, rushing towards them at twice the speed of the cable car, if not more. Meanwhile, the darkness gradually dissipated, and light once again swept over the entire space. It was as if it was intended for them to witness this scene. This was not a good situation. If things continued like this, the dried corpses would catch up to them before the cable car reached the next platform. The attack of the dried corpses was a rule-based attack. If a player's body was touched 3 times by them, the player would be turned into a dried corpse. Even they couldn't dodge this kind of attack. Chen Yi's brows furrowed slightly as he looked back at the group of dried corpses chasing them along the cable, preparing to rise and take action. Hee. Suddenly, Tai Chui chuckled on the side, standing up from the cable car like a solid tower. He looked towards the dried corpses on the cable with simple and honest eyes and rubbed his right shoulder, his voice booming. "Brother, watch me!" The next second, before Chen Yi and the others could react, a sudden roar erupted beside their ears. Firm as a rock. Immediately after, they saw a shadow that was over 7 meters tall appear behind Tai Chui, looking almost identical to him. As soon as this shadow materialized, it didn't pause at all. It jumped with both feet. Its whole body, like Mount Tai crushing down, leaped into the air, and then directly slammed into the dried corpses on the steel cable. Bang! The massive collision sound echoed continuously throughout the space. Under the strong impact, the steel cable began to shake violently, and even the cable car under their feet swayed incessantly. The power of this attack was nothing less than that of a 100-ton vehicle crashing into you at 100 kilometers an hour. And it was from out of the sky too. This. Chen Yi was momentarily stunned by the shadow that had suddenly emerged behind Tai Chui, and subconsciously muttered in a low voice, "This skill, truly a firm as a rock. originally proud on behalf of her brother, heard Chen Yi's voice and suddenly became a bit dazed. With her hands gesturing aimlessly in the air, she turned her head towards Chen Yi with a puzzled look and asked, "Yi, why did you suddenly start talking like that?" When Yi was speaking the first half of the sentence, his voice was still a whisper, but when he came to firm as a rock, his tone suddenly became forceful and resonant. And for some reason, the 4 words firm as a rock that Yi had just said seemed to be very intimidating, carrying a kind of inexplicable authority which made her feel a tremor in her heart for a moment. The contrast was too stark. It sounded very strange. As if a shallow stream had suddenly led into a deep abyss. "It's nothing." Chen Yi shook his head with a calm expression and didn't speak, instead, the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. This was the first time he had felt the impact of his title as the idiom Solitaire King. Not bad at all. It's just that the timing of use was a bit off. Just then, they noticed that the dried corpses on the steel cable, having been hit by the strike, simply flickered with yellow light and didn't stop for a moment, continuing to rush towards them. Tai Chui's attack had not caused the slightest damage to these dried corpses. Ding! The dried corpses on the steel cable are in an unattackable state. A timely notification sounded in their ears. In other words, at this moment, the dried corpses were invincible. And at this point, the dried corpses were only about 6 or 7 meters away from them, seemingly only a few steps away from jumping into their cable car. Chen Yi couldn't help but sigh. His only option was to activate the mechanical elk Christmas sleigh and leave the cable car, hovering in mid-air while staring at the somewhat dazed dried corpses standing on the cable car. He had wanted to experience what the normal player progression was like in this dungeon. But it seemed now as though he was trapped in a no-win situation. If it were an ordinary player without a flight vehicle, faced with this situation, they could do nothing but wait to become dried corpses. Just a D-level map. There shouldn't be a no-win situation like this. He glanced casually at the dried corpses on the cable car, looking up at them anxiously yet helplessly, furrowed his brows, picked up a cup of fruit tea, and took a sip. His brows slowly relaxed, he took a deep breath with relief, nodded with satisfaction. This time it's the domineering lychee flavor. Not bad. Just a bit too much slush. Chapter 62. Do they really treat them as little Carla? Chen Yi sat on the snow sled and lowered the glass shell above him. He then casually rested his arm on the edge of the window frame and glanced down at the dried corpses standing cluelessly on the cable car. He curled his lip and remained silent. Did they really think they were little Carla? To be toyed with, they couldn't possibly believe they could take them down. Apart from Santa Claus, no monster has been able to chase them this far. Just speaking of Santa Claus irritated him, the guy had chased them for a full 24 hours. He's just a neutral boss for December, right? But here he is in May, strutting around. By the time December comes and he's grown stronger, if he doesn't chase Santa Claus around Blue Star for 30 days, he simply won't be satisfied. But, on the other hand, the glass shell of this sled is quite human-friendly, it can be raised and lowered freely, similar to a convertible's top. As for those dried corpses below, they're completely helpless, only able to stay on the cable car, lifting their heads and looking around blankly at Chen Yi and his team, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. The speed of the sled they're on below is said to be unrivaled, the fastest vehicle to date. It's just the blink of an eye. The snow sled smoothly came to a stop on the high platform. Meanwhile, those dried corpses were still leisurely making their way towards the platform on the slowly moving cable car. What is this? Tuberculosis Rabbit, who hopped off the sled, looked at a short column on the platform with curiosity and approached it. At the edge of the platform, there was a quadrangular column about a meter high, and on the flat top of the column was a button flashing a green light. There was also a light screen beside it. Activate button, and the cable car will make another round trip. And the speed of the cable car this time will be 3 times faster than the first. I get it now. Tuberculosis Rabbit suddenly realized and nodded, then turned to look at the dried corpses on the cable car below the cables. I know how ordinary players should get through this level. If ordinary players did what we did, they'd be wiped out by now. The dried corpses climbing the cables are not only faster than the cable car, but also in an unattackable state, almost a certain death situation. Let's say 10 players reach this level. The correct way would be to have only one person get on the cable car, let this player come to the platform to press the button, causing the cable car to make another round trip, and this time 3 times faster than before. The remaining 9 players simply hold the lower, shorter platforms entrance and prevent the dried corpses from rushing out. As long as the players have certain offensive props and skills, they can definitely hold the entrance. After all, these dried corpses have no defense attributes as long as they don't come into contact with the players. In this way, they can keep watch until the cable car returns again, and then board the cable car together. The cable car will be very fast this time, and the dried corpses won't be able to catch up at all. Consequently, they would successfully escape this level. This must be the correct way to clear this level. Tuberculosis Rabbit's face showed trace excitement explaining his thought process, feeling just now as if he were Sherlock Holmes himself, with the spirit of Conan and Kudo Shinichi on his shoulders, undeniably smart. With his current logical state. Without exaggeration, if he were placed in a werewolf kill game room right now, he could confidently claim the role of prophet and deceive the villagers to the point of losing their socks. He suddenly started enjoying this kind of brain-powered feeling. Yi, what do you think? Chen Yi stood on the spot, gazing down at the dried corpses still on the cable car, and after pondering with his staff for 2 seconds, he spoke softly, this level is actually somewhat of a trap. The dried corpses on the steel cables are invincible, and there's a button on the high platform that makes the cable car go back and forth again. Both these pieces of information are hidden, they're not explicitly written in the rules. In other words, if it's a player's first time on this map, almost 90% would likely be killed here. Until someone discovers this information and manages to take it out alive, then later players will slowly start to avoid this. This must be where the difficulty of pioneering a new area lies. Under normal circumstances, we would probably be dead by now. Luckily, we're not normal. However, Chen Yi narrowed his eyes towards the corridor on the lower platform. The revival point for these dried corpses has always been behind us. When we stood at the entrance of the corridor, the dried corpses kept respawning inside. That means, we can totally farm points here. The kind that goes on for 3 days and nights. Killing one dried corpse grants you 1 sands of time point which can be exchanged for rewards in the shop after clearing the level. After thinking in place for a while, he turned to look at a white circle of light on the platform behind them. On the platform behind them, there was a white circle of light clinging to the ground, slowly flickering every 3 seconds as if reminding players to step in. And now the map had shown that they had entered the second activation point. But the prompt to proceed to the third activation point had not yet sounded in their ears. Does that mean you only truly reach the second activation point if you step into that circle of light? After pondering briefly, Chen Yi made up his mind and stepped back onto the sled. Let's go, time to farm points. Chen Yi controlled the sled, hovering in mid-air, without any movement, patiently waiting for more than 10 minutes. His title. The special effect of Violators, Annihilate 9 clans. Would be on a 30-minute cooldown after one use, and there was still a little time left before it was over. Once the cooldown had completely elapsed, he maneuvered the sled back to the lower platform, and by this time, the dried corpses had all made their way up to the higher platform via the cable car. Seeing Chen Yi head back again, the dried corpses scrambled once more to climb the steel cables, hurrying towards Chen Yi and the others on the lower platform. Just as the dried corpses were about to jump down from the steel cables. Apocalypse. Maniacal laughter. A crimson frozen throne slowly rose from beneath Chen Yi's feet, and at the same time, an old man's crazed laughter suddenly echoed in the air, as if coming from beyond the heavens. The lines are much fewer this time. Tuberculosis Rabbit licked his dry lips with some emotion and clicked his tongue. Just 2 words? His script isn't impressive. Following that, 20 heavily armored soldiers slowly emerged from the white light in front of them, blocking the path of the dried corpses. In less than 10 minutes' time, the 100-odd dried corpses on the steel cables were all wiped out. Immediately after, the heavily armored soldiers, having cleared the remaining dried corpses, did not pause but hurried towards the cave entrance to offer support. Meanwhile, at the entrance, 4 heavily armored soldiers were already standing in line inside the corridor, emotionlessly swinging and slashing their swords non-stop. A slaughter had begun. Chapter 63. To wear the crown, one must bear its weight. The strongest attack of the dried corpses was the utterly unreasonable rule attack. There was no need to kill or wound you. If their bodies made contact with you 3 times, you were inevitably transformed into a dried corpse. Such formidable rule-based ability, however, was completely ineffective against these soldiers, deprived of their rule attack. the dried corpses had no choice but to revert to more primitive methods of assault. But, the heavy armor worn by the soldiers made it difficult for the dried corpses to breach their defenses, and only during the intervals between the soldiers' sword swings could they manage to inflict minimal damage. Groups of 4 soldiers sealed the corridor tightly. It took a full 10 minutes for these 4 soldiers to be obliterated, but before the dried corpses could get excited, another 4 fresh soldiers surged forward from the rear. And outside the corridor entrance, there stood densely packed hundreds of soldiers, waiting to enter. Comfortable. Tuberculosis Rabbit lay contentedly in a rocking chair, cradling a milk tea in his left hand and gnawing on a roast chicken with his right, continuously rocking in the chair and humming an unknown tune. The roast chicken in his hands was a grade E prop. It had been drawn by Brother Yi during his first 10 consecutive pull. Prop name, Air Roast Chicken. Prop grade, grade E. Prop effects, you will have an everlasting chicken to eat, made from air, which cannot satiate hunger or stimulate stomach movement, but it can offer you an almost absolutely authentic taste and feeling of fullness. Prop restrictions, you may freely switch between the following flavors only. Original, spicy, 5 spice, extra spicy, salt and pepper, honey. Prop introduction, a scientist, frustrated with a decade of failed dieting, invented a total of 289 air food props in a rage. These props can satisfy your cravings without causing weight gain, and air roast chicken is just one of the 289. They had been grinding for a full 3 hours now. Right on this platform, they hadn't gone anywhere else. During this time, he rode a sled all over the area, observing every inch of space, which turned out to be uninteresting nothing but stone walls. With no entertainment activities available, he could only lie on the rocking chair and munch on roast chicken. Oh right, this rocking chair was also a prop. These seemingly useless props could actually be quite useful at times, like the current situation. After all, life isn't filled with battle every moment. It wouldn't be right to claim that only combat useful props are good. Just like the air roast chicken which was trying so hard to please him, how could he say it wasn't a prop? That would be rather hurtful to the feelings of the air roast chicken. Gulp. Tai Chui stared at the roast chicken in Tuberculosis Rabbit's hand, swallowing his saliva in longing. Seeing Tuberculosis Rabbit's gaze, he turned his head awkwardly towards his sister, his face showing a mix of helplessness and confusion. This thing. Tuberculosis Rabbit looked at Tai Chui, then back at the roast chicken in his hand. It's not that I won't let you have some, but this item is somewhat private, isn't it? Aren't you disgusted by all the saliva on it? Even if you're not, if you chew on it and then hand it back to me, I'll find it repulsive. Chen Yi, on the other hand, had been sitting on the frozen throne from start to finish, resting with closed eyes and crossed arms against the back of the chair. It was a bit chilly. It was the height of summer, and by all accounts, it should have been hot. But for some reason, within this sense of time map, there was always a breeze, making it feel somewhat brisk. The frozen throne beneath him came with very buggy special effects. As long as he did not leave the frozen throne, the soldiers he summoned could exist indefinitely unless killed in battle, and with enough points, he could even summon soldiers as densely packed as an insect tide. For these 3 hours, he had not left the frozen throne, and the summoned soldiers kept fending off dried corpses at the entrance of the corridor on his behalf. And the cost to summon one soldier was merely 10 points. The value for money was extremely high. But, the catch was that he couldn't leave the frozen throne. Once he did, all the summoned soldiers would return to dust, leaving him, after sitting for 3 hours, with a numb backside. It's tingling. Indeed, the old saying was true, heavy is the head that wears the crown, and to sit upon the throne one must suffer discomfort. Out of boredom. He opened his personal panel, starting to read through each word and sentence, since he had nothing better to do anyway. So far, he had collected nearly 1,200 points. Although he wasn't sure about the purchasing power of the points, after grinding for 3 days and nights, he should be able to buy quite a few things. Have some of this. Tuberculosis Rabbit once again pulled out an air roast duck and air mantou and handed them to Tai Chui and Ji. We'll need to grind for another 2 or 3 days, so you'll have to bear with it a little longer. After all, once this map is open for exploration, probably only players with a sense of time pass will be able to enter. We don't have that thing, so we would lose this great opportunity to farm rewards. This thing can make you feel full, so going hungry for 2 or 3 days isn't a big deal. At most, you'll just feel a bit dizzy. As for thirst, I've got coffee and sour plums. The sour plums can help you quench your thirst visually, so you won't feel thirsty. I've also got milk tea here. Conserve it and it should last you about 2 or 3 days. No worries. Ji shook his head and leaned on Tai Chui, mumbling in a daze, my brother and I often went 2 or 3 days without eating before, so we're used to it. Then it's all good. May 26th. It had been a full 3 days since Chen Yi and the others entered the Sands of Time map. At this time, the outside of the Sands of Time instance was crowded with people. Many Yanqing players and Law Enforcement Bureau personnel with serious expressions gathered at the entrance of this triangular, pyramid-shaped entrance, waiting patiently. The triangular, pyramid-shaped structure had only appeared recently, and the Law Enforcement Bureau noticed it soon afterward. But they couldn't enter. Clear words were written on a screen at the entrance. This map Sands of Time is currently being explored by players. There are 4 players exploring: Chen Yi, Tuberculosis Rabbit, Tai Chui, Ji. Please wait patiently for the exploration to finish. Other players cannot enter until the exploration is over. It's just, isn't this exploration taking a bit too long, a full 3 days? One must know that among those 4 players was Chen Yi. Who in Yanqing doesn't know this pro player with numerous titles above his head? If a big shot like him is spending 3 days and still hasn't finished exploring, then what hope does a regular player have of completing this map? 2 days ago, the Law Enforcement Bureau and the military had completely merged into one. From now on, there would only be the Law Enforcement Bureau. This was how the whole federation was being reorganized. Behind these law enforcement officers were a dozen or so cannon beds. They were cannons that had been hastily manufactured over the past few days. Similar to a gun turret. A crossbow arrow as thick as a forearm was fixed to a lathe, with an electric motor at the back connected to the arrow. When the motor was activated, the crossbow arrow would thrust forward and retract at a high frequency. When a dozen of these cannon beds were lined up, they were very effective against the insect race monstrous creatures that came in waves, like the tide. There were 2 wheels installed underneath the lathe for towing. It wasn't classified as a vehicle, so it could be used normally. P.S. Following old traditions, a few points are declared. This book is completely fictional, and the name Yanqing was chosen at random. It was never intended to be a real city name. Blue star signifies a federal structure. The Law Enforcement Bureau will be the only official combat organization from now on. The official side is not the main melody and can basically be ignored. Just a little imagination is needed, and it should be understood, so there's no need to elaborate further. Chapter 64. It seems that we'll need to prepare some dry food for exploring new maps in the future. Still not out. A uniformed captain stood before the crowd with an unsightly expression, gazing at the light screen at the entrance to the Sands of Time pyramid, feeling somewhat uneasy inside. He actually had some connection with Chen Yi. In recent times, he was the one who contacted Chen Yi every time there was a job to collect corpses, and the points from the Law Enforcement Bureau given to Chen Yi also came from him. During the last global event of the extraterrestrial invader, even though the insect race monsters were taken care of by Chen Yi, resulting in very few casualties for Yanqing in that disaster. But, from a certain perspective, most of the rewards from that event also went to Chen Yi. This meant that the players in Yanqing generally had much weaker strength compared to players from other cities. And now with Chen Yi's fate uncertain within the map, if he were to die there, another such event would likely prove too much for Yanqing players given their current strength. It could be said that anyone in Yanqing could afford an incident, but Chen Yi could not. Not yet. A subordinate standing beside Captain Wang spoke up, reporting, "We've already made contact with other cities. So far, about 7 or 8 cities have discovered this kind of map that abruptly changes terrain. They've all sent people in for map exploration. But, the death rate is very high, it usually takes several groups of people to completely explore a map. Once a map is explored, players can teleport into the map from any corner of the globe with a global travel pass, but if they can walk to the entrance of the map, they can enter without needing a pass. It's just..." The subordinate hesitated a moment before speaking cautiously, but even if map exploration fails, it usually only takes 2.3 hours at most. We haven't gathered any information on a map that requires a full 3 days for exploration like this one. Got it. Captain Wang's pupils carried a shade of gloom, and the feeling of uneasiness in his heart grew stronger. If Chen Yi were to die in the exploration of this map, the situation in Yanqing would turn dire. Meanwhile, other players who had come to observe the commotion were also gathering and discussing among themselves. How come even a map has appeared, it's like playing a real game. If only there were a resurrection system, this crappy game doesn't even have that, not fixing such a big bug. That's not the important part. The important thing is that even Chen Yi took 3 days. If the map is released, do we dare to enter it? We don't dare, but we have to. A middle-aged man nearby tapped his pipe on the ground, speaking feebly, the vehicles are all gone, all the supplies in Yancheng are starting to run short. Just yesterday, the Law Enforcement Bureau was recruiting people to pull rickshaws to the granary for food. Now everything requires points, it's hard to get by without them. There are definitely points to be earned within the map, we have no choice but to enter. Now we can only hope that Chen Yi passes smoothly. Later on, if we can gather some points, we can ask Chen Yi if there's anything we need to pay attention to regarding entering the map. Can Chen Yi really care about the few points we have? That's not an issue, we have numbers on our side. Surely we can gather a few thousand points between so many of us. That's true. With that, the people around stopped speaking, all looking up together at the light screen of the Sands of Time Pyramid entrance, unsure when Chen Yi would finally complete the exploration of the map. Or if he wouldn't come out at all. Inside the Law Enforcement Bureau of Yancheng, several elders sat in front of a table, seriously staring at a light screen panel on the wall. Main city task. Task objective: establish a point ticket trading system, ensuring every player in Yancheng has spent and can earn points, making points circulate within the city. Task reward: activate the city task system, enabling players who enter Yancheng to take on corresponding tasks to earn points. Task requirement: 1/10 of the city's players have spent points, and 1/15 of the city's players have earned points. Overall progress, 63%. Fund management, 1 million points. Director. An elder by the table side, turned off the air conditioner, and continued, so far, we have several issues. We've allowed some shops to start accepting points as payment, for example, selling a basket of meat buns for 1 point. But the problem is, we only distribute 3 points per day to the workers, which means the points we give to the workers per day are only enough to buy them 3 baskets of buns. This is unreasonable. To resolve this, there are only 2 methods. First, increase the salary of the workers. Second, reduce the price of the buns. But we can't increase the workers' salary at all since our goal is for a large enough number of people to successfully earn points, and our operation fund is only 1 million points. If we raise the salary of the workers, it means we can't allow more people to earn points. Reducing the price of buns is even less feasible, as that's already a subsidized price. Otherwise, with the current situation in Yancheng, the price of buns should have started skyrocketing. This also leads to very few people willing to spend their earned points on these processed goods, and the progress required for this task is also the slowest. Most people go for rice or flour, something basic to fill the stomach, but our supply is limited now due to the vehicle restrictions. Enough. The director furrowed his brows, pondered for a long while, and then spoke, can't you even cheat off someone else's work? How do other cities do it? Other cities, the extraterrestrial invader event and the insect race provided many players with points, so they could at least ease up a bit. But nearly all the points generated from the extraterrestrial invader event in Yancheng are in Chen Yi's hands. I understand, I'll think of a solution for this. The pressing matter is to complete the main city task as soon as possible. Only after activating the task system quickly can the players have enough sources of points income. We can't raise the workers' wages for now, so let's focus on meeting the target number of people first. At this moment, Chen Yi and his group had arrived in front of the white circle of the 5th activation point. By stepping into this white light circle, the Sands of Time map would be considered fully explored. They had farmed the 2nd stage for a whole 3 days, and if it wasn't for their bodies barely being able to take it anymore, they had planned to farm for another day and night. Looks like we'll need to pack some dry food for future map explorations. Tuberculosis Rabbit mumbled dizzily on the spot. His stomach wasn't hungry, nor was his mouth thirsty. All of these could be solved with props, but the dizziness and slow thinking caused by not eating for a long time couldn't be helped. They needed to get out. If they didn't leave now, they might end up dying here. Chapter 65. Turns out the Sands of Time we've been pioneering is just the basic version? BAA. The reindeer pulling the sled flashed a hint of panic in its eyes, bleating softly as it tucked its head under the sled. Probably frightened by the occasional glimpses of desire in the tuberculosis rabbit's eyes. Don't worry, can't eat you. Tuberculosis Rabbit looked somewhat regretful as it drew its gaze away from the reindeer, wiping the drool from the corner of its mouth, then glanced at Tai Chui not far away. Speaking of which, you're quite resistant to hunger. It's been 3 days, and you look like nothing's wrong. Ji, lying on Tai Chui's head, murmured weakly with her head drooping, whether he eats or not, his mind stops working, so you can't really tell the difference from the outside. Let's go. Chen Yi was the first to walk forward, stepping onto the white light circle, and immediately a notification sounded in his ear. Ding! Congratulations to the player and others for successfully reaching the 5th activation point. Success escaping from the pursuit of the dried corpses. As the Sands of Time map has been cleared by players for the first time, congratulations to the players for successfully pioneering. Please claim your pioneer rewards in exchange for the required props at the points store. Following the successful pioneering, all players holding a Sands of Time pass can teleport into this map from anywhere in the world unobstructed. Players who manage to reach the Sands of Time map entrance through various means can also enter without a pass. As the notification ended, the platform under their feet suddenly began to emanate a gentle glow, followed by the sound of soft music coming from somewhere. 7 or 8 fireworks shot into the sky all around the platform, bursting open within the pyramid's inner space without any smell of gunpowder. Utterly spectacular. It was as if they were celebrating their successful clearance. At the same time, 2 massive leaderboards slowly emerged in front of them. Half-transparent panels hovered in mid-air with a sense of weightiness. Sands of Time Dried Corpse Players Infection Leaderboard. Rank 1, Vacant. Rank 2, Vacant. Rank 3. Sands of Time Human Players Kill Points Leaderboard. Rank 1, Chen Yi, Kill Points 16702. Rank 2, Vacant. Rank 3. 2 leaderboards, one for dried corpse players and the other for human players. Chen Yi gazed thoughtfully at the 2 lists in front of him and nodded without speaking, noting there was also a leaderboard specifically set up for dried corpse players. It seemed likely that many players would deliberately become dried corpses to gain rewards by infecting human players. Actually, I think this map is pretty good. Tuberculosis Rabbit suddenly spoke up. We could just throw all the dying elderly, severely ill patients, or some disabled people into this map. Let them get infected into dried corpses. Dried corpses in this map have the ability to resurrect indefinitely, meaning these people, as long as they don't leave the Sands of Time map, will have the ability to resurrect endlessly. If children miss their elders, they can even come to the Sands of Time map from time to time to see their family. In a way, it's like attaining immortality, effectively eradicating the separation of life and death. Next to him, Ji, who had been listless and unclear-minded, suddenly regained clarity in her eyes upon hearing Tuberculosis Rabbit's words, looked up at the earnest Tuberculosis Rabbit, and realized what it meant to be half demon, half saint. Have you considered that some people might prefer to die rather than live endlessly as a dried corpse confined to one place? I know. Tuberculosis Rabbit shrugged casually. I never said we were going to do that, it's just a thought that suddenly popped into my head. It at least provides one more option for those about to leave this world. It's unclear whether dried corpse players and human players can communicate. Whether players who have turned into dried corpses can avoid chasing human players and just rot from the start, staying in some corner to build their own small dried corpse society. Or even negotiate with human players to keep boosting each other's points or something. Anyway, it feels like there are quite a few operable aspects in this instance. If you have a pass, you could also use it to teleport into the Sands of Time for a temporary escape whenever you face a fatal crisis. Chen Yi withdrew his gaze from the leaderboard. 16,702, that's the total number of points he had accumulated in 3 days. There were in total only about 100 dried corpses within the Sands of Time map. That meant, in these 3 days, he had averaged killing each dried corpse about 100 times. It was just too bad these dried corpses had no memory and no intelligence, otherwise, just the sight of Chen Yi would have made them quake in their boots. Anyone who'd been killed over 100 times by the same person would probably have a bit of a psychological shadow. And next, it was naturally time to enjoy the spoils of these 3 days. He took a deep breath, finished the last sip of milk tea, and licked his somewhat dry and cracked lips before turning his head to look at the points store next to him. In these 3 days, he had only drunk fruit tea, not a single drop of water. After all, fruit tea is just a beverage and not something that can be drunk in place of pure water for long term. Too much sweetness, it only made you thirstier, and there was also the feeling of a sticky throat being blockaded. Very uncomfortable. Once out, he'd have to hug a water tank and drink for 3 days straight. The points store in front of him, however, had everything from low to high exchange points available. 1 point, 1 point. Small speaker, 3 points. Anti-infection energy shield, 5 points. Mini steel cable, 6 points. Stone brick landmine, 10 points. Many of the items were exclusive for use within the Sands of Time map. For example, that small speaker would allow your next sentence to echo in the ears of all dried corpse players and human players within the Sands of Time. Another example is the anti-infection energy shield, which could defend against being infected by a dried corpse player once. And then there was the stone brick landmine, which could be set as a landmine embedded within stone bricks, quite effective if used in the corridors of the second level. In addition, there were even props prepared for dried corpse players. Eye of Truth, 3 points. Might of the Steel Claw, 4 points. Bouncing Shoes, 5 points. Disguise Clothes, 10 points. These props could be purchased by anyone, but would only become effective when one became a dried corpse player, and their effects were quite powerful. The Eye of Truth allowed dried corpse players to see which human players had the anti-infection energy shield and which didn't. The Might of the Steel Claw extended the dried corpse's arm reach, making it more effective for dried corpse players to infect human players. Bouncing Shoes boosted the dried corpse player's jumping height. Disguise Clothes allowed a dried corpse player to disguise themselves as a human player for a short time, thus sneaking into human player teams and starting a massacre. All of these were just the basics. Besides them, the points store had many more props for both human and dried corpse players to use in the map. What could be foreseen was, once these props fell into the player's hands, the scene of passing through the Sands of Time would undoubtedly be chaotic. Damn it! Tuberculosis Rabbit stared at the various props in the points store in front of him, straightening up with a somewhat shocked expression and murmured in astonishment. It turns out that our pioneer run of Sands of Time was just the basic version. With so many Sands of Time exclusive props added, even if we were to go through the map again, it feels like it would be a challenge. Dried corpse players without intelligence and who can't use props, versus dried corpse players with intelligence who can use props. These are completely two different things. I can even imagine those fully armed dried corpse players in the Sands of Time, wearing disguise clothes and holding Might of the Steel Claw, strutting around arrogantly. Chapter 66. Fashion Name, The Emperor's New Clothes Short-Sleeved. There were many such props in the points store, all of them little gadgets. But they were the practical kind. A human player killing a dried corpse rewards 1 point. So how many points does a dried corpse player get for infecting a human player? Tuberculosis Rabbit looked thoughtfully at the points store in front of him and said, after all, the map seems to give a bit more of an advantage to human players. Human players can camp and farm points at the second level. But dried corpse players don't have the ability to farm points. With just those few players, even if all were infected, that's all the points there would be. So dried corpse players should get more points for infecting humans, right? Chen Yi didn't respond. He just looked at the rewards in the points store in front of him and began to calculate which ones he could buy. He started with the most expensive one and looked down the list. The most expensive items were 2 props. Exclusive title, Sands of Time Human Hero. Exchange price, 10,000 points. Limit of 5 per person. Exclusive title, Sands of Time Dried Corpse Pharaoh. Exchange price, 2,000 infection points. Limit of 5 per person. He could definitely buy the first title, as he had enough points. But he couldn't buy the second title, it had to be purchased with infection points, and 1 infection point was awarded for infecting 1 player. To amass 2,000 infection points, he would have to infect 2,000 players. He had never been a dried corpse, so he couldn't obtain that title. Without much hesitation, he secured the first title. With the sound of a ding, his remaining points dropped to 6,702. Then he continued to look further. Prop name, Rainbow Tail Flame Trail. Prop level, C grade. Prop effect, can be embedded only in vehicles, making your vehicle leave behind a slowly dissipating rainbow tail flame trail in the air as it moves forward, extremely dazzling. Prop introduction, the expensive things in this world are often useless, like this prop. Exchange price, 3,000 points. Buy. Without hesitation, Chen Yi waved his hand in satisfaction and embraced this prop even though it did not help improve his combat ability one bit, but he was very happy with it. What could be more delightful than bringing game effects into the real world? He was eager to see the rainbow tail flame trail his sleigh would leave behind in the sky as it took off. It was all about making a splash. If only he could beautifully decorate those 15 nitrogen cylinders at the back of his sleigh. Just 3,000 points. He had toiled hard in the map, sleeping on the frozen throne for a full 3 days, what was it all for, if not for this moment? To appear saintly in public, one must endure hardships in private. Besides, there was another tail flame trail that was quite flashy. 100 Ghosts Tail Flame Trail. As the vehicle moved, it left behind a trail of mist, and in that mist, hundreds of skeleton soldiers surged and slowly dissipated. He watched the special effect preview. Very nice. Only, he couldn't buy it, it required 600 infection points to buy this thing. There were a number of props in the points store that could only be bought with infection points, which meant they were exclusively for dried corpse players. These props were just for him to look at, not to buy. Up to now, he had no desire to turn into a dried corpse to grind points on the map. However, these props were tradable, so maybe he could buy them from other players later on if he spent some points. It's just that he wasn't sure if anyone would be willing to sell, since players who could afford to buy these with spare infection points probably weren't short on points either. His gaze continued to wander the points store, and stopped hesitantly over an item. Prop name, Fashion Component. Prop level, C grade. Prop effect, can randomly obtain one component of a C grade fashion set. Prop introduction, treat yourself, buy a few more skins. Exchange price, 100 points. Limit of 5 per player. He stared at the prop in front of him, hesitating without saying a word. He actually had a component of a fashion set in his hands. A bare onesie pajama that had been lying quietly in his backpack. Not yet usable. It could only be used after the fashion system update in June. Of course. Even after the fashion system update, he had no plans to walk down the street wearing a bare onesie pajama set. He was fine with letting his character wear all sorts of odd and quirky outfits in the game, and the stranger they were, the happier he was. But he would never, ever accept wearing weird and quirky fashions down the street in real life. Still, he saw this item on sale in the shop for the first time, and it wasn't expensive, so was there any reason not to buy it? None. Buy. Even if he really did get the bare onesie pajama, he certainly wouldn't wear it, but selling a complete set could fetch a high price. After mentally making up his mind, he bought all 5 fashion components. And with that, he only had 3,202 points left. Without any hesitation, he began to open the boxes. He opened all 5 fashion component boxes. Ding ding ding. As the sounds of box opening rang out, Chen Yi breathed a sigh of relief, slightly relaxed, yet his gaze turned to the results before him with a hint of disappointment. There were no bare pajama fashion components. Luckily. But his gaze suddenly turned weird, as if he got something strange. Fashion name, the Emperor's New Clothes Short-Sleeved. Fashion level, C grade. Fashion effect, when wearing an item of this suit, it keeps the body at a constant temperature at all times. Collecting all pieces of the set will unlock the full set effect. Fashion introduction, a qualified emperor should learn how to cultivate his people's sense of fashion. This item was exactly like the emperor's new clothes that he had imagined. The so-called short sleeves were completely transparent, looking like they were made out of plastic. Completely transparent. Chen Yi suddenly fell silent, beginning to think that maybe the bare pajama wasn't that bad after all. At least compared to the emperor's new clothes, he felt the bare pajama to be somewhat more acceptable. But the effect of this fashion was really strong. Much stronger than his bare pajamas. Keeping the body at a constant temperature meant that no matter how cold or hot the weather was, one could easily get through it without ever worrying about hypothermia or similar conditions. Hypothermia could be very dangerous at times. It was much better than his effect that allowed him not to need bathroom breaks. Right at that moment, Ji beside him suddenly let out an excited exclamation of joy. I got a fashion set. Chapter 67. I knew it, how could Tai Chui's sister possibly be called Ji? Chen Yi glanced curiously toward Ji, who was not far away. He had thought that Tai Chui and his companion would possibly exchange their points for some points or perhaps buy some items to boost their combat strength, but he didn't expect them to go straight for buying a fashion treasure box. That was indeed quite extravagant. In the second level, only he and Tai Chui continued to farm points. He relied on the frozen throne to farm points, while Tai Chui would occasionally use firm as a rock to charge headlong, and managed to farm quite a lot of points as well. The tuberculosis rabbit didn't join the fight at all. After all, the rabbit's single strike was overkill for this place, there was simply no need for it. Ji also didn't have any points. This girl seemed to have no attack skills, but she must possess skills that enhance physical abilities, otherwise, being thrown around by Tai Chui every day like she was, her body would need to be strengthened or her brain might get shaken out. It looked like Tai Chui used his own points to buy Ji a fashion component treasure box. But speaking of which, Ji was petite but had a nice figure, curvy, with quite a large chest. She seemed to easily entice the destructive desires in men's hearts. He had once heard a theory suggesting that men who prefer petite women have a strong subconscious desire to dominate and destroy, enjoying the feeling of conquest and obliteration. He had forgotten where he read that, some marketing blog post, perhaps. Thank you. Ji, who seemed somewhat lethargic from not eating for a few days, looked toward the fashion panel in front of her, her smile blossoming like smoke, her eyes squinting into crescents. Full of anticipation, she carefully tucked the prop into her backpack. I'll wear it after the update in June. What's the fashion name? The tuberculosis rabbit, seemingly curious, casually spoke as he pulled out a pepper-flavored carrot from his chest and stuffed it into his mouth. Yi also has a fashion component, his outfit looks pretty good as well. And as the tuberculosis rabbit pulled out the carrot, a deer hiding under the sled flashed a visible panic in its eyes and dove under the sled, its hind legs struggling on the ground. Don't worry, I won't feed it to you this time. The tuberculosis rabbit munched on the carrot with some displeasure. If it weren't for worrying about you starving these past few days, who would give you such tasty carrots to eat? Speaking of which, just how many of these carrots did you eat at Santa Claus Place? Eating one of these carrots is like going to the gallows for you. I thought you just liked eating carrots, but it turns out you're simply not fond of these fancy flavored ones. I personally think they taste quite good, crunchy, and they don't stick in your teeth. By the way, Ji, what's your fashion? Here. Ji waved her hand, projecting the fashion component from her backpack into the air. Fashion name, Blazing Summer Spaghetti Strap Sundress. Fashion level, C. Fashion effect, when wearing one piece of this set, each step taken will cause waves to ripple underfoot, and upon collecting the entire set, the full set effect will be unlocked. Fashion introduction, have you been to the beach? Go take a look. The breeze by the sea can easily stir men's ambitions and women's romantic feelings. This outfit is called Blazing Summer, and this is one of the components, a spaghetti strap sundress. The tuberculosis rabbit, who was munching on a carrot, upon seeing the fashion displayed in the air, suddenly stiffened and fell silent. After a while, he gulped down the remaining carrot in his mouth all at once. It's pretty nice, do you plan to wear it? Yeah, I will, Ji replied earnestly, her voice crisp as she cocked her head to the side. Don't you guys think this style is very refreshing and simple? It looks cute, but it reveals just a tiny bit too much. I might be criticized as someone edging on inappropriate. But even if it's edgy, it doesn't matter. The world has come to this, who knows when we'll die, might as well try things I've never tried before while I can. Then she looked toward the tuberculosis rabbit's shocked expression and couldn't help but laugh. Tuberculosis rabbit, could you manage your shocked look a bit? I grew up orphaned, living a tough life with a handicapped brother, never really had much luck. Now that the end has come, I should at least try some things I've never had the chance to try before, right? I've longed to wear some clothes I've never worn before, not like before when I had to drag my brother to the market to sell fish during the day, stinking and soiled. It was only at night that I could secretly put on the little dress I bought and stroll down the streets with my brother, but... Ji suddenly sniffed and mumbled with slight dissatisfaction, it's just that often, I'd see some drunk man's vomit in the tree pits, which really ruins the mood. We only live for about 30,000 days, shouldn't we live the life we desire? Tuberculosis rabbit stayed silent where he was, not understanding but deeply shocked. However, he did understand one thing, Ji would really wear that dress. We must meet up in June. What's going on? There's going to be a new rule in the version update in June. I'm afraid you won't get it, so let's meet up and Yi and I will explain it to you. I see. Ji nodded with crescent eyes and couldn't help but smile. That would be great. Alright. Chen Yi cast a weird glance at Tuberculosis Rabbit before saying, I've spent all the points, it's time to prepare to leave. I need to rest well for a few days, these past days have felt more exhausting than if Santa Claus chased me for a whole day. Why do I keep thinking about being chased by Santa Claus for a day? He frowned slightly, pondering for a moment before sighing, seems like I'm quite a grudge holder, aren't I? Okay, time to go. With the remaining points, he exchanged them for some boxes with props and skill fragments. He didn't exchange any points. Exchanging for points was definitely not worth it, as 1 point could only be exchanged for 1 point. Definitely a loss. Killing a dried corpse in this map is not so easy. After all, it's the Black Mist mode. And just stepping out from the Sands of Time map, Chen Yi shielded his eyes with his hand, adjusting to the glaring sunlight outside, before he noticed that, somehow, so many players had gathered at the entrance to the Sands of Time pyramid. At this moment, all the players were staring at him with piercing eyes. In the background, he seemed to hear these players collectively let out a sigh of relief. We're going to head off, okay. Seemingly afraid of being stared at by so many people, Ji tugged at Tai Chui's clothes, then turned his head towards Chen Yi, I've sent both of you friend requests. If you need anything in the future, you can contact us. Let's help each other out. Yeah, go ahead. See you, Tai Chui. The next second, Tai Chui grabbed Ji around the waist, took a deep breath, and with a pitcher's backward throw motion, hurled Ji high into the air. Alright, Iron Nail. Then he turned to Yi with a naive smile, saying in a deep voice, well, brother, I'm off. Suddenly, before Tai Chui finished speaking, he was forcefully pulled back by Ji using a skill from mid-air. A voice that seemed somewhat frustrated and embarrassed could be faintly heard. How many times have I told you, don't call me Iron Nail when we're out, call me Ji. Ah, you're so annoying. It's so embarrassing, okay. Tisk. Tuberculosis Rabbit shielded his eyes with his palm and, watching the 2 small dark spots disappear at the horizon, couldn't help but remark admiringly, that's a truly unique way to travel. And to think Tai Chui hasn't eaten for 3 days, yet he still has so much strength. Also, out of sudden contentment, Tuberculosis Rabbit smiled broadly, I just knew there's no way Tai Chui's sister would be called Ji. Calling her Iron Nail sounds more reasonable. I'm very pleased with that name. Chapter 69. If you do not abandon me, I am willing to acknowledge you as my sworn father. Along with the sound of the Tuberculosis Rabbit's voice, the players surrounding the sleigh scattered in all directions, exchanging glances without a word, merely hiding to one side with snickers. Naturally, no one took the Tuberculosis Rabbit's words seriously. Nor was there anyone audacious enough to speak up and say, I want it. Hey! Looking at the scene before him, the Tuberculosis Rabbit nodded in satisfaction, now I can finally understand the feeling of those who drive luxury cars to dinner. Yi was about to store the sleigh back in his backpack, but the Tuberculosis Rabbit insisted that he must park the vehicle in front of the door. Which is the current situation. Indeed, it turned out as he expected. Many people were observing their sleigh, checking what made this world's first vehicle so special. It's just a bit of a pity. The Tuberculosis Rabbit looked around regretfully, the restaurant's class is a bit low, there's no valet to park the car, and I've got a classic line left unsaid. I wonder when I'll have the chance to use it. Let's go. Chen Yi casually patted a child's head by the roadside, playfully tweaked his nose, then strode towards the sleigh and slowly ascended under the watchful eyes of the public. He then shot off into the distance, leaving behind a long, colorful trail of rainbow flames. Just like a rainbow after a rain. Quite spectacular. Before long, they returned to their own neighborhood and, as usual, parked the sleigh on the rooftop of their building. Here you go. Chen Yi pushed the twice-cooked pork and potato rice he had been carrying towards the reindeer, you gonna eat this? He bought 2 servings of food, ate one himself, and took the other with him. He decided to pack a serving for the reindeer after seeing it seemed to resist the oddly flavored carrots in the Sands of Time map, which led him to a theory. Maybe the reindeer didn't actually like those ordinary carrots. Maybe it would eat anything that didn't have an odd flavor. That's why he tentatively took a serving of rice for the reindeer to try. The previously listless reindeer suddenly looked up at Chen Yi with disbelief and bright eyes when it saw a portion of twice-cooked pork rice being slowly pushed in front of it. Seeing Chen Yi nod and gesture for it to start eating, the reindeer's eyes instantly reddened, tears welling up, and it let out a long howl to the sky. Met. Then, with a flash of human-like excitement and exhilaration in its eyes, it buried its face in the lunchbox and started gobbling up the food, looking as ravenous as a ghost that had been suppressed under Five Fingers Mountain for 500 years. You really like it that much? A look of surprise flashed in Chen Yi's eyes, and he couldn't help but laugh. It seems that aside from those carrots, you're quite fond of everything else. Our future teammate cook might have to prepare a meal for the reindeer as well. When he stored the reindeer along with the sleigh in his backpack, the creature would fall asleep but wouldn't be in absolute time stasis, meaning even when inside the backpack, the reindeer could still get hungry. He had to take care of the reindeer's diet. After all, if the reindeer had any issues due to hunger, that meant the vehicle would be out of commission. It wouldn't be easy to catch another Santa Claus's reindeer again. Luck doesn't come knocking on the door every time. Well, how do I put this? The tuberculosis rabbit stood still with hands in pockets, looking at the content reindeer with a strangely colored expression, and murmured, "If only the reindeer could speak, I feel like it would be on its knees thanking you right now and preparing a little speech. Adrift in life, lamenting not meeting a great master. Should you not reject me, I wish to acknowledge you as my adoptive father." It must be said that the reindeer's current state really does fit this little speech. You could see it. If this number 2378 reindeer known as Five Spice told the other Santa Claus's reindeer about its treatment with Chen Yi, they would probably all defect and come to Chen Yi's side the next day. Then they would wait eagerly at his doorstep every day for him to feed them. After the reindeer was satisfied with its meal, burping contentedly and collapsing back on the ground, Chen Yi only then put the reindeer and sleigh back into his backpack and headed downstairs. "Let's go, when we get back we'll upload the post, and then get ready to sleep." However, as they arrived at the door of their home, they suddenly saw the hallway in front of their door blocked by about 7 or 8 people. All holding machetes with unfriendly looks, as if ready to start a fight at any disagreement. "Get lost." The tuberculosis rabbit took a step forward, flicking away his cigarette butt at Scarface, who was leading the group, with irritation. "Do you understand me? I'm tired and want to sleep. I don't want to kill anyone before sleeping, it tends to lead to nightmares, get it?" Scarface's face went cold as he looked at the cigarette butt that fell at his feet. He said nothing, but stepped slightly back, revealing a middle-aged man in a suit standing behind him. "Good afternoon to you both." This middle-aged man in a suit casually pulled out a property certificate from his suit with a mischievous smile. "We are all civilized people, we should talk reasonably. This certificate is for this house of yours. You two have struck it rich now. But have you forgotten that you're renting this house? I've come to collect the rent, that wouldn't be a problem, would it? No matter where this issue is taken, even if it's to the Law Enforcement Bureau, I'm in the right. Isn't that correct?" "Hey!" Tuberculosis Rabbit was taken aback for a moment, then immediately rolled up his sleeve and pulled out a claw knife from his chest, pointing it at the middle-aged man in front of him. "Have you come here to cheat your Grandpa Rabbit? We paid the rent for a whole year at the beginning of the year, and there's still over half a year left before it expires. What are you coming here demanding rent for now? Big brother?" The middle-aged man in the suit spread his hands with a helpless look and said, "Go out and have a look, brothers. You need points for practically everything these days, right? Not everyone has so many points on hand. We're all tight for them. Can you still pay rent with cash now? Of course, it has to be calculated in points. 5,000 points for a year's rent. As soon as you two pay the rent now, I'll leave immediately. Otherwise, you two definitely won't be able to return home today and will have to move out temporarily." After Chen Yi glanced at the other tightly closed doors on both sides, he looked up with slight weariness at the few people in front of him. "You weren't our landlord before, were you?" I just bought this property a few days ago, so I'm the landlord now." "All right, 5,000 points, right? Come here, I'll transfer it to you." The middle-aged man in the suit froze for a moment, but without overthinking, he walked over immediately. However, to be on the safe side, he added another sentence, "I have relatives working at the Law Enforcement Bureau. Everything I'm doing now is legal. I believe you know how to make the right choice." I know." Once the middle-aged man was close enough, Chen Yi heaved a sigh and pulled out a sniper rifle from his chest with an arm as straight as a sword cultivator's, and fiercely aimed straight at the man's eye socket and thrust. Bang! Under the enhancement of doubled physical fitness, the middle-aged man barely caught sight of something stabbing at him and had no time to react. while his body immediately stiffened and fell straight backwards, heavily crashing to the ground. However, just as Chen Yi pulled out the sniper rifle and calmly held it to walk toward the remaining people in the corridor, the middle-aged man who was lying on the ground suddenly stood up shakily. "Damn it!" The middle-aged man in the suit, clutching his blood-gushing eye socket with a ferocious and hysterical expression, stared at Chen Yi with bulging eyes and screamed, "You killed Yi! You killed my Yi!" Chen Yi frowned, but upon seeing the lucky child of the God of Love title above the man's head, he understood what had happened. The judgment must have taken effect. The man's woman had taken the fatal strike for him. The woman died, and the man was revived. What a hassle! Chen Yi sighed lightly, weighed the sniper rifle in his hand a few times, and then again stride towards the middle-aged man. So, he was alive again? No problem. Just kill him one more time. The doubled physical fitness made killing these little Carlas as simple as slaughtering chickens. He definitely wouldn't open his mouth for 5,000 points, let alone 5,000 points, he wouldn't give these people even 50 points. He could easily give away 50 points, but he wouldn't let himself be extorted for even 10 points. Open his mouth once, and there would be many more times after that, and these people would cling to him like persistent plasters. Since they had planned to extort him, they must have been prepared for death, right? I only wanted to collect some rent, I didn't plan on killing anyone. The middle-aged man in the suit screamed uncontrollably with a voice swelled with pain, "Yet you killed my Yi, and now you want to kill me. Then let's die together." As his voice fell, the prop the man had been keeping in the right pocket of his trousers was abruptly activated. Then, the hallway suddenly plunged into darkness, as a somewhat sinister woman's laugh echoed intermittently in everyone's ears. Chen Yi stood still with a slight frown and calmly said, "Damn." But this time, his title seemed to have failed, as no light erupted from it. The surroundings remained pitch black. Before he could make any more moves, he heard the laughter suddenly go from distant to near by his ear. Giggle, giggle. Immediately after, he felt a warm breath by his ear and a cold hand abruptly placed on his back, creeping towards his neck. Chen Yi didn't turn his head, he just weighed the sniper rifle in his hand and then thrust it full force behind him. It was as if he stabbed something, and yet it felt like he hit nothing. But soon, the darkness dissipated, the woman's laughter ceased, everything returned to silence, and the real scene before his eyes was revealed. Along the corridor, the middle-aged man in the suit and the 7 or 8 men with machetes had all shrunk into a corner, their bodies violently trembling, clutching their necks and screaming incessantly. "Get out! Get out!" Chapter 70. Oh, the hand is quite slippery. The men huddled in the corner, their eyes almost bulging out, stared straight ahead. They clutched their necks tightly with both hands. The fear on their faces seemed almost ready to spill out of the pages. Their bodies trembled so violently that a scientist might consider whether they could be a sustainable energy source. Except their pupils were clearly lifeless, unfocused, and their gazes somewhat scattered. They continued to mutter to themselves in low, panicked tones, laced with fear. "Don't come any closer, I command you speedily, may Buddha bless me. Quick, think of something else, right, I once had a breakup, and it was really tough. That was an experience from my high school days, it was about the girl who sat next to me whom I really liked. We used to bunk classes together and go out to eat. During nap time, when we'd rest our heads on the desks, I'd casually let my elbow touch hers, even if it was just a small contact. But it made me incredibly nervous inside, that ambiguous feeling that just thinking about it made it hard to resist sinking into the memories. I knew she wasn't asleep either, both of us savoring that ambiguous sensation." As he spoke to himself, the fear on the face of the man huddled in the corner with a knife began to slowly fade, replaced with a hint of tranquility and remembrance. Chen Yi, deep in thought, squatted not far from this man, listening intently to his monologue, realizing it was a way to force himself not to conjure images of ghosts in his mind. But how can you control it when that thing is right behind you, touching you with its hands? He could control it because he had no fear. It wasn't that he couldn't visualize ghosts in his mind, rather, he had no fear and could easily banish any mental images of ghosts. As the man in the corner resumed his monologue, the fear visibly diminished from his face, but his hands continued to protect his neck tightly, exuding a stronger sense of calm. Later, we got together. That was a truly happy time. But then the breakup happened, after which I was really in pain. Let me think about what she said when we broke up. I remember now, she said I was as ugly as a ghost. A ghost. The man curled up in the corner suddenly froze, his hands around his neck loosening subconsciously, and in the next instant, terror flooded his pupils. A ghost. And then, bang! The man's body exploded in the corridor, tearing apart, with his blood and flesh smearing the whole hallway, leaving behind only a skull fragment on the ground. Chen Yi, having foreseen this scene, had already taken cover in the opposite corridor before the explosion. After the explosion, he emerged again, glancing with some distaste at the bloody scene around him, then looked thoughtfully at the remaining people. He might understand now why his title wasn't lighting up. The incident just now occurred in his mind, an illusion. Which means the title would light up, but it was invisible to him. His vision was trapped within his own mind. This prop, under the Mei rules, is indeed a mutually destructive tool. At least for others, it's usually a death sentence. Chen Yi, glancing at the tuberculosis rabbit beside him, remained silent without speaking. He was initially quite concerned about the tuberculosis rabbit when he first came out, but after a glance at it and the others, he suddenly felt that worrying about the tuberculosis rabbit was a fundamentally wrong choice. Not far off, the men huddled in the corner were yelling hysterically. "Don't come here, get away from me!" If it wasn't spoken words forcibly shifting the attention from their minds, then what was it? Meanwhile, the tuberculosis rabbit's situation appeared rather odd. "Yo, pretty smooth hands. Don't run, let me touch you, I've never felt a female ghost before. Tisk tisk, this feels so real, is this an illusion or what? Amazing. That shy laughter, I like it." Chen Yi silently shifted his gaze from the tuberculosis rabbit and strode toward a middle-aged man dressed in a suit huddled in a corner, pulling a prop from his pocket. That man was the one who activated the prop, causing everything that had happened. Prop name, Banshee's Feast. Prop level, C class. Prop effect, upon activation, pull everyone nearby into an illusion where a personal banshee will provide you with a massage lasting half an hour. Prop limitations, using it once will result in a 24-hour cooldown. Prop description, banshees don't have offensive capabilities, they don't even have teeth. No offensive ability. Chen Yi was taken aback for a moment, looking at the introduction panel on the prop and then realizing the cold, delicate hand that had reached for his neck in the illusion. It wasn't planning to attack him. It was about to give him a massage. Damn it, should have said that earlier. He had killed that banshee already. Which means the banshee's massage service could have lasted half an hour, but if it were killed, then the succubus would disappear. And this rule wasn't mentioned on the props panel. At this moment, those huddled thugs in the corner, unable to contain their inner terror and the increasingly vivid images of ghosts in their minds, exploded one after another. Boom, boom, boom. Soon, only the tuberculosis rabbit was left in the whole corridor. Chen Yi glanced at the tuberculosis rabbit, his mouth twitching slightly, and still without a word, he walked to the side staircase, lit a cigarette, and leaned against the wall, waiting patiently. A full half-hour passed. Is it over? The tuberculosis rabbit's gaze suddenly cleared, looking down somewhat blankly at the space in front of him, which was empty and desolate, surrounded by bloodstains everywhere. That's it, hey. The tuberculosis rabbit, feeling slightly unsatisfied, pulled up his pants. That was kind of fun. But when he scanned the surroundings and didn't see Yi, he immediately became anxious, searching among the chunks of flesh on the ground and shouting with a trembling voice, "Yi, Yi, where are you? Yi, don't scare me, man. Yi. Over here." Chen Yi, with a cigarette in his mouth and expressionless, walked out from the neighboring corridor. "I'm not dead, stop your wailing." Phew. Seeing this, the tuberculosis rabbit let out a long sigh of relief, then put down a chunk of flesh he was holding and looked around. Are they all dead? All died right at our doorstep, how unlucky. Yi, wait for me, I'll go inside to grab some tools and clean this place up before I go to sleep. Dozens of minutes later, the tuberculosis rabbit, slightly out of breath, stood up and wiped the sweat from his forehead, looking toward the body bags piled up against the wall. He finally breathed a sigh of relief. Finally done, now I can sleep. First, let's throw the trash to the outskirts. Upon activating the sled, within a few minutes, the two of them had dumped the trash at the garbage plant in the suburbs, which was still operating. As the vehicle disappeared, many of the city's basic public services had gone, such as waste disposal. To date, the amount of waste generated within the city each day is not insignificant, and transporting it out of the city to waste facilities is a laborious task for humans. It can only be moved by a handcart, pulled by people. Very exhausting. But, one point of relief is that the waste produced in the city has decreased significantly compared to before. After all, there's not much left to consume, and the city is still barely functioning. But there's no time to worry about that now. After all, there are far more pressing matters at hand, so all that can be done is to urge the reduction of waste and the manual transportation of trash out of the city as much as possible. Currently, there are not enough points to pay wages, and many are willing to work for just food. Former bank savings have become worthless paper. Everyone must seriously consider two issues: food and safety. Finally, after sorting everything out, Chen Yi and the Tuberculosis Rabbit finished washing up and lay in their own beds. Chen Yi, while organizing his Sands of Time strategies to post on Yanchinch forum, casually asked, "Hey Tuberculosis Rabbit, when you were pulled into the illusion, didn't you think of ghosts at all?" Ghosts? The Tuberculosis Rabbit, still feeling the thrill of the experience, shook his head while lying on the bed. No ghostly images came to mind at all. Who could think of ghosts in such a slippery situation? This prop is really something. I've collected it. Later on, when we're roughing it in some map for a few days, we can use this prop in the middle to take a break and relax. True. Chen Yi nodded, finished organizing the strategy, and uploaded it before lying exhausted on the bed and closing his eyes. I'm off to sleep. Not long after, the sound of Chen Yi's faint snoring filled the room. Perhaps due to exhaustion, the usually non-snoring Chen Yi started snoring today. Oh. The Tuberculosis Rabbit nodded and soon fell into slumberland. And soon, the Tuberculosis Rabbit's sleep talk echoed in the room. We meet again, ha, hey, let me tell you about something interesting I encountered today. A female ghost, no laughing, I'm serious. Today, when Yi and I were heading home, the sun gradually set. The Tuberculosis Rabbit's sleep talk and Chen Yi's snoring created an atmosphere in the room that made one want to fall asleep immediately. And as Chen Yi and the Tuberculosis Rabbit entered their dreams, the Yanchinch forum was still buzzing. Many people commented and liked Chen Yi's post, and the moderators promptly featured and pinned it. All players planning to venture into the Sands of Time were studying the guide earnestly. And at the entrance to the Sands of Time, players who had been waiting for a while stared at the guide, seriously starting to discuss it. The map is in black fog mode with only 1 meter of visibility. Lighting props, non-prop lighting tools, and lighting skills are unusable. This is dangerous. It means we can only see the dried corpses when they're within a meter of us, which is way beyond the safe range. The first stage's dried corpses follow set movement patterns, and we need to determine the path based on the patterns on the floor. There's also a point farming spot in the second stage.